Hey friends, tonight let's uncover the secret life of ancient Roman sleep. And yes, it involves hot rocks in bed. Picture this, it's winter in a Roman villa, and outside the wind is howling like a dramatic gladiator who just lost his favorite sword. Inside, you're slipping into a stone-cold bed. Unless, of course, you've got a clever little trick up your toga sleeve. Before you get too cozy, take a second to like and subscribe if you find value in what we share. And while you're at it, drop your location and the current time in the comments. I'd love to know who else is getting comfy with a bit of Roman history tonight. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into this chilly night together. You're in a Roman home, the kind with dusty marble floors, ceilings just low enough to bump your head, and a lingering scent of olive oil in the air. There's no central heating, no electric blanket, no warm button on the mattress. Just you, a bed made of wood and leather straps, a wool blanket if you're lucky, and a bag of hot pebbles. Yes, hot pebbles. People back then used to gather smooth river stones, carefully chosen, mind you, none of those jagged drama queens, and heat them over a fire. Then they'd wrap them in cloth or place them inside small ceramic containers and tuck them under the bedding. Think of it as a DIY heating pad, but more rustic and with a slight fire risk. Don't worry, it didn't happen too often. The trick was all in the timing. Too hot and you'd burn your leg. Too cold and you might as well snuggle the wall. But when it was just right, pure toasty bliss, that's when you start drifting off, fingers curled around a warm bundle of stones, ears catching the soft hoots of an owl outside. You might wonder, was this common across all of Rome? Here's where it gets interesting. Wealthy families had fancier setups like underfloor heating systems called hypocausts in some homes and bathhouses. But the average Roman made do. If you weren't rich enough to have slaves stoking fires beneath your feet, hot stones were your best bet, portable, reusable, and completely whisper-free. There were other cozy strategies too. Thick wool tunics worn to bed, families sleeping close together for warmth, bonding, or awkward cuddling. Depends on the household, and tightly shut wooden shutters to block the wind. But nothing quite matched the consistent warmth of a rock bundle tucked near your toes. You're probably picturing a small pouch of stones under the blanket. That's spot on, but even funnier, some Romans believed in warming up the whole bed, first tossing the hot stones under the sheets, letting them sit for a bit, then removing them before sleep. A dramatic preheating ritual. You've heard of warming up before a workout? This was warming up before a nap. Here's the quirky twist. In some parts of the empire, especially the colder northern provinces, people would add herbs to the rock bundles. Lavender, chamomile, even sage. Why 4 scent, of course? Because nothing says bedtime luxury like falling asleep to the smell of grilled chicken seasoning. Kidding, kind of. And here's your soft chuckle of the night. The Roman poet Martial once joked in a letter that a friend of his burned his foot reheating a pebble pouch too fast in the coals. That's basically the ancient version of "I fell asleep with the heating pad on." We've all been there. Martial called it the noble scar of a man who fought the cold and lost. Now let's dip our toes into some academic mud where scholars love to argue. Was this pebble warming trick uniquely Roman, or did they borrow it from older Etruscan traditions? Some say it was common in Etruria, the central region of Italy, and that the Romans just added their flair in poetry. Others argue it came from the East through trade and cultural exchange. As with many things Roman, the answer is likely yes and also no. We often picture Roman villas bathed in sunlight, floors covered in mosaics. But winter nights could be freezing, especially in stone-built homes. So these hot stones weren't just about comfort, they were about survival and warm feet. As you tuck deeper under your imaginary blanket, you might wonder, what did a Roman bedroom smell like? That depended. If you lived above a taberna, a shop or tavern, you probably got whiffs of yesterday's fish sauce. If you lived in the countryside, it might have smelled of fresh air, sheep, and maybe a nearby fig tree, or your cousin's feet. Sorry. And as you snuggle into the warmth of your mental pebble pouch, here are 3 final chuckles to take with you. The Roman version of a heated blanket malfunction. Oops, I scorched my toga again. Imagine being the unlucky servant in charge of pebble rotation. Gaius, your rock's gone cold again. Somewhere in Rome, someone definitely tried to patent perfumed pebble sets for the rich. Pebbles by Prada, if you will. You wake up, well, not really wake up since you were never fully asleep. But you slightly shift your mental toga and notice the gentle crunch of hay beneath your head. Congratulations, you're now sleeping like a true Roman. On your very own Travasorium, the Roman pillow, which is absolutely nothing like the fluffy clouds you're used to. Tonight, we're diving into pillow politics. Because in ancient Rome, even your pillow could reveal whether you were a senator or just someone who knew a senator's laundry boy. Let's start with what a pillow actually meant in Roman times. If you're picturing a plump rectangle wrapped in Egyptian cotton, lower those expectations. The average Roman pillow was more of a compact, practical bundle. For the working class, it was often a simple sack stuffed with hay straw or dried grass. Soft, debatable. Aromatic, sure, if your idea of aroma includes strong barnyard notes. The elites, of course, took things several steps further. Wealthier Romans enjoyed pillows filled with wool feathers, or if you were truly pretentious, goose down. Some even scented them with crushed herbs like lavender or rosemary. Just imagine the servant tasked with fluffing the senator's goose feather pillow, muttering under their breath. Your neck, my lord, shall never suffer the vulgarity of straw. But beyond comfort, pillows signaled status. Decorative covers with dyed embroidery, especially in deep purple or Tyrian blue, were a big deal. In a way, your pillow wasn't just for sleep, it was an accessory, a statement piece, a nighttime flex. Here's a delightful aside. Did you know Romans sometimes shaped their pillows like miniature couches? Tiny ornate bolsters that match their lectus, the Roman couch bed hybrid. Yes, the same bed you dine on, lounge on, and then maybe sleep on. Who needs separate furniture when you can just mildly adjust your reclining angle? We also need to talk about the triclinium lifestyle. In wealthier homes, people reclined while eating using their pillows, not just for back support, but as social cues. The angle of your elbow on your pillow, it might say more about your power than your job title. Oh, look at Lucius, they'd whisper. He reclines at a 30-degree power tilt. Truly a man of influence. Now, for the quirky detail of the night, in some villas, guests were offered custom pillows to dine and nap with. And yes, you could request extras if your host was feeling generous, or if you were charming enough to earn a bonus bolster. But pillows weren't just tools of comfort or markers of wealth, they held meaning. Some were embroidered with blessings for sleep, love, or vivid dreams. Others had protective symbols sewn in like eyes or keys to ward off spirits while you snoozed. Yes, your pillow might double as an anti-demon talisman. Multitasking ancient Roman edition. Let's float down the social ladder. For slaves and laborers, pillows were a luxury rarely used at all. A curled arm, a folded piece of linen, or a smooth wooden bench was more likely. Sleep posture wasn't exactly up for discussion when you worked 16 hours a day. You slept wherever you dropped. A popular debate among modern classicists involves a simple question. Did Roman children have their own pillows? Some argue they shared adult beds and pillows. Others believe smaller versions were made from softer materials, perhaps even stuffed with scraps of recycled toga. There's no definitive answer. But if you were a child in ancient Rome and your sibling got the better pillow odds, or you complained about it in Latin. Here's another fascinating belief. Romans thought your sleep posture, and by extension, your pillow choice, could affect your health. A too soft pillow was said to weaken the neck and make the mind lazy. A firm one, on the other hand, kept the spine aligned and dreams vivid. Ancient chiropractic advice wrapped in passive-aggressive pillow reviews. And just like today, people had preferences. Some slept slightly propped up, especially after a heavy meal. Others liked to lie flat. Some curled up like figs. Others stretched out like overconfident statues. Now imagine yourself reclined on a saffron-dyed, wool-stuffed pillow, embroidered with dolphins leaping across the corners. The scent of rosemary lingers softly. Your elbow sinks gently. It's not quite memory foam, but it remembers you enough. And now your gentle comic relief served on a feather-stuffed platter. Somewhere in Rome, a pillow fight absolutely broke out, followed by an emergency poetry reading to restore dignity. An elite Roman probably bragged, "My pillow was blessed by a priest and plucked from a virgin goose." The true tragedy of Rome's fall, all those embroidered pillows, lost to time and mildew. You're lying there perfectly propped on your rosemary-scented wool-stuffed pillow, neck aligned. Spine moderately pleased when you begin to notice something else, the soft hum of the afternoon air. Not the buzz of traffic or the ping of a phone, but a warm, lazy silence broken only by the distant clip-clop of a donkey or the occasional shout of a bread seller. This is siesta hour in ancient Rome. And yes, napping wasn't just allowed, it was practically sacred. Welcome to the world of snooze and status, where taking a nap didn't mean you were lazy. It meant you were living the dream. The Romans had a concept called meridiatio, a post-lunch rest, taken around the 6th hour of the day, which we now call noonish. And it wasn't just for kids or the elderly. Senators, merchants, poets, they all indulged in this gentle afternoon ritual. If you had the luxury to pause your day, you'd retreat to a quiet room, close the shutters, maybe drape a perfume cloth over your eyes and drift into a state of socially endorsed drowsiness. Of course not everyone had this privilege. Laborers, bakers, market sellers, they often worked through the sweltering midday heat. But for the privileged and the sneakily opportunistic, meridiatio was a way to recharge both body and reputation. In fact, napping had curious status symbolism. The busier and more important you were, the more justified your need for a midday rest. He's not lazy, someone might whisper. He's preserving his mental clarity for tonight's symposium. That's Roman, for he just really wanted to lie down. The wealthy napped in dimly lit rooms called cubicula diurna, literally day bedrooms. These were tucked away from the main house, shielded from the blazing sun. Heavy curtains kept the space cool and quiet. Some even had trained attendants who walked noiselessly and fanned their masters without disturbing a single eyelash. For those who lacked a dedicated nap room, or 10 naps happened wherever one could recline a portico. A bench in the atrium, or even a library corner where scrolls doubled as makeshift pillows. Do not try this with your Kindle. Here's the quirky detail of the day. Romans believed that if you napped too long during meridiatio, you might wake up confused and speak nonsense for a while. This sparked a whole genre of Roman jokes where people blamed strange behavior on an overly indulgent siesta. Picture calling your boss. "Sorry, I missed the meeting. I was overwhelmed by my nap." Seneca once mocked a man who slept so long each afternoon that he practically lived a double life. Awake for breakfast, asleep until sunset, then up again like a confused owl. Honestly, goals, let's stir the scholarly pot a bit. Some historians argue meridiatio wasn't truly sleep, as we understand it, more of a meditative pause, a mental break. Others insist it was full deep napping, complete with dreams. As usual, there's no single answer. But what's clear is that the Romans deeply valued this sacred stillness between the hustle of morning and the buzz of evening. Picture yourself now. You've just finished a lunch of olives, goat cheese, and barley bread. Your stomach is pleasantly full. The sun is high. Your eyelids feel dipped in warm honey. You retreat to a shaded corner with a view of a fig tree. Your head leans back, your legs stretch out, and the noises of Rome blur into the distance. That, my friend, is the good life. And what about dreams? Romans loved to interpret them, especially those dreamt during naps. A daytime dream was considered more prophetic than a nighttime one, untainted by moonlight or shadow. Dream of a flying dolphin during meridiatio. Your cousin might say it means money is coming, or that you've been eating too many anchovies. Here's a fun cultural note. Some people hosted nap-themed poetry salons. Yes, real events where folks read odes to their favorite nap spots. One preserved poem honors the third cushion on the left side portico beside the lemon bush, where silence is most divine. Basically, a Yelp review for napping. And now a few feather-light chuckles before we drift deeper. The Roman version of a sick day. Probably faking a prophetic nap. The gods sent me dreams I cannot possibly work today. Someone absolutely got dumped in ancient Rome for snoring through a philosophical salon. If you've never napped in a room cooled by silent fanboys and perfumed curtains, well, neither have I. But a person can dream. You've had your nap, a proper Roman meridiatio no less. Curtains drawn, sandals off, drool potentially forming. But now evening creeps in and the city begins to stir once more. You yawn, stretch, and notice something strange. The sound of a wooden cart bouncing off cobblestones. A caged rooster shouts indignantly. Someone's playing a double-pipe flute just slightly off-key. Welcome to the night shift of Roman urban life. Tonight we explore the noise of the night. Let's begin in an insula, a Roman apartment building often several stories high, built with equal parts ambition and questionable mortar. If you lived on the lower floors, you were wealthy or simply lucky. If you lived near the roof, hope you enjoyed hiking and leaky ceilings. But regardless of your floor, one thing was certain: you were never alone and never sleeping in silence. The Roman night was noisy, very noisy. Picture thin walls, no insulation, no double glazing, just a few bricks between you and your neighbor's life story. You might share a wall with a baker kneading dough at 2 a.m., or a tanner boiling animal hides like it's a midnight spa treatment. Add to that the street sounds: vendors packing up oxen, carting produce under moonlight, public drunkards philosophizing loudly, cats in love or war, and the clatter of a night watchman's staff. Even the fountains kept gurgling. Tranquility, you'd need divine intervention. The Romans knew this, of course. The poet Juvenal famously complained that sleeping in Rome was nearly impossible unless you were rich enough to own a villa atop a quiet hill. For everyone else, you just adjusted. You grew accustomed to the squeaking wheels and the late-night whispers. Which brings us to a fun historical truth: some Romans actually used sound buffers. Heavy curtains were hung not just for warmth or decoration, but to muffle the noise from next door. Think of it as ancient noise-canceling tech with a touch more mildew. And in the homes of the elite musicians, yes, some wealthy Romans hired flutists or harpists to play soft melodies while they fell asleep. Ancient ASMR, if you will. You weren't truly elite until someone played you a lullaby while avoiding eye contact. Now for tonight's quirky detail, public urinals. Yes, they existed, and yes, they were loud. Imagine a stone trough at the corner of your building, where passersby relieved themselves while humming, arguing, or reciting bad poetry. If your window overlooked it, congratulations, you lived in the comedic zone of Roman city planning. Worse still, fire brigades patrolled the streets at night, but not quietly. Clanking armor shouted commands and the occasional testudo formation drill. Apparently, no one told them the turtles were sleeping too. Now picture this: you're lying in your tiny upper floor room, curled on a straw mattress. Your neighbor's chair creaks as he sits down for his evening cheese. Below you, someone argues over lentil prices. Across the alley, a child begins singing off-key and won't stop. You sigh, pull your tunic over your ears, and silently wish Jupiter would smite whoever invented brass instruments. It makes you wonder, how did anyone sleep? This brings us to a scholarly puzzle. Did ancient Romans have a different tolerance or even a preference for noise? Some archaeologists suggest the constant buzz was actually comforting. Silence, they argue, might have felt eerie or unsafe. Like people today who sleep better with a fan or white noise, perhaps Romans needed the soft murmur of city life to lull them. Others say the opposite, that upper classes fiercely sought silence, building stone barriers or escaping to countryside villas for some peace. Evidence points to small retreats called suburbana, where elites fled during hot months, maybe just for a quiet nap. Whatever side you take, here's one thing we know. If someone tells you Romans lived simpler lives, they've never tried sleeping next to a midnight fishmonger. But you're clever, you figured out a trick. You grab an extra pillow, wedge it over your ears, and pretend the cat fight downstairs is just ambient wildlife. The fireman just percussionists, that wine-soaked philosopher yelling about fate, your personal bedtime storyteller. It's all part of the show. And speaking of shows, here are your bedtime giggles. Somewhere in Rome, someone definitely invented earplugs using beeswax in sheer desperation. The first Roman noise complaint, probably carved on a wall, quietus icanus sleepus. Someone absolutely marketed nighttime harp performances as a luxury sleep aid, then fell asleep mid-pluck. You survived the night. Barely. You're not sure if it was the fishmonger's midnight lullaby or the donkeys playing percussion with their hooves, but somehow you slept. Sort of. You stretch, adjust your tunic, and step into the morning air, which smells faintly of olives, charcoal, and someone else's breakfast. But tonight we're not talking about breakfast. We're going somewhere different. You're not in a bed, a fancy villa, or even inside a building. You're lying down in a public square. Yes, tonight we explore sleeping in public, because in ancient Rome, sometimes your best bed was a bench, a colonnade, or the steps of a temple, if you were lucky. Let's set the scene. You're a traveler. You've arrived late to the city, too late to find a room at an insula. Maybe you're a student from Gaul, a merchant between deals, or a philosopher too dramatic to plan ahead. So where do you sleep? Under a portico? Beneath the stars? Wrapped in your cloak, resting your head on a sack of figs you didn't sell? Not exactly glamorous, but surprisingly common. Public sleeping was an accepted, if not exactly celebrated, part of Roman urban life. The city was full of transient workers, pilgrims, and poor citizens with nowhere else to go. While vagrancy wasn't admired, it also wasn't criminalized unless you made a scene, blocked a road, or offended the wrong senator's sense of order. There were even popular resting spots: the steps of the baths of Agrippa, the shady side of the Forum in late afternoon, the covered porches near temples where priests sometimes turned a blind eye. These weren't official nap zones, but they were tolerated. And in a city as dense and chaotic as Rome, tolerance was already a luxury. Now for the quirky bits, some temples encouraged sleeping in their courtyards. The practice was called incubatio, a sacred sleep meant to invite divine dreams. You'd lie on animal skins or straw mats and hope a god, often Asclepius, the healing god, would appear in your dream with advice, or, if you were lucky, a miracle cure. No guarantees, no refunds. And the most curious part, People would wake from these temple naps and record their visions on small plaques or even have them carved into stone. One inscription reads rather dramatically, "I dreamed of a lion with the face of my uncle. He told me to stop eating olives. I am now healed." Scholars still debate whether these dream reports were spiritual theatrical or simply early Yelp reviews for divine health services. But not all public sleeping was sacred or peaceful. Some people had no choice. If you were a runaway slave, an orphan, or just broke, the street was your bedroom. And street sleeping came with hazards, weather theft, and occasionally being stepped on by a mule. Experienced urban sleepers developed strategies. Rule 1, find a wall, sleep curled up with your belongings under you. Rule 2, if you're with others, sleep in shifts. Rule 3, avoid sleeping near latrines or wine shops. For obvious reasons. There's even a line from a Roman comedy where a character clearly homeless. Jokes. My bed is wherever the stars wink at me, and I only worry when they start crying. That's poetry from the pavement. Now let's talk about class. For elites, sleeping in public was unthinkable unless it was a performance. Some philosophers and Stoics made a show of napping in public to reject comfort and luxury. Picture a man in a pristine toga dramatically sprawled across temple steps, quoting Socrates while passers-by mutter, "Ugh, another theater napper." You, on the other hand, are blending in. Cloak pulled over your head like a hooded burrito. The stone beneath you still warm from the day's sun. A stray dog pads past and sniffs your toes. Otherwise, the city hums around you like a lullaby of clatter and snore. Now for our scholarly twist, some historians argue that public sleeping was a form of civic negotiation, a way for the marginalized to claim space in a city that often had no room for them. Others believe it was just survival, no philosophy, just fatigue. You decide which is more true as you shift against your sack of figs. You glance up. The stars are faint through Rome's smoky haze. Your fingers curl around your traveling pouch. You breathe in, and for once the air feels still. And here are your 3 sidewalk chuckles for the night. Someone absolutely faked divine visions just to get a free nap at the temple. Jupiter told me I'm too important to sweep floors. Sorry, boss. There was definitely a brief trend called street stoicism nap, dramatically quote, Plato ignore bird droppings. The Roman version of do not disturb was simply an angry grunt and one sandal raised in warning. You wake up on the steps of a temple a bit stiff, slightly disoriented, and possibly covered in fig dust. The stars have faded, the street is coming back to life, and you stretch with the grace of a cat that spent the night impersonating a rock. But before you shuffle off to your next Roman adventure, you pause, because there's something you've never quite figured out. What exactly were Romans wearing to bed? Tonight we explore the gloriously confusing, sometimes scandalously breezy world of ancient Roman bedtime fashion. Welcome to Pajamas Optional. Let's start with the basic truth: Romans didn't have pajamas. Not really. The concept of designated sleepwear wasn't a thing. You either slept in what you wore that day, or in something simpler, or if you were feeling especially libertas, in nothing at all. And honestly, most of the time, people preferred sleeping without clothes, especially in warm climates and tiny unventilated rooms. Why wrap yourself in itchy wool when you could let your skin do the breathing? Now, before you get scandalized, remember Roman modesty functioned differently than ours. Public nudity had rules, sure, but private nudity, that was a different story. If you were home and your cubiculum curtains, drawn oil lamp dimmed, you could sleep however Jupiter made you. The only real concern, whether your skin was clean and your feet were washed. Dirty feet in bed. Now that was considered improper. That said, there were options for those who preferred a layer or two. Some wore a light linen tunic to bed, tunica interior, essentially underwear length, breathable and loose. If you were modest or shared a room with family members, you might add a thin wool wrap. Not because of shame, but mostly for comfort, or because the floor was cold and the blanket was communal. For wealthier citizens, bedtime wear might even include perfume cloths or fine Egyptian cotton imported at great expense. Imagine lying down in a tunic that smells faintly of myrrh and lavender stitched with gold thread no one will see. That's luxury that whispers, I know I'm fabulous, even in the dark. Now here's your quirky detail. Some Romans had a habit of going to sleep with their toga nearby, folded and ready. Not because they wore it to bed, but because it was a pain to put on and you didn't want to fumble with 20 feet of fabric at dawn. Especially if your job involved shouting in the Forum at sunrise. Oh, and the real fashion statement? Not what you wore to bed, but what you wore when answering the door in the middle of the night. There are actual letters and poems mocking people who came to answer a knock dressed like a senator on laundry day, too casual to be respectable, too fancy to be asleep. Imagine someone at 2 a.m. in full toga insisting I was in bed, I swear. Let's not forget the underclass. Laborers and slaves often had no sleepwear at all. They slept in whatever they had or nothing. If you were lucky enough to have a tunic that wasn't completely covered in soot, you kept it on. But for many, the fire at the hearth was warmth enough, and a corner by the wall was dressing room and bedroom combined. There's a bit of scholarly debate about whether certain fabrics were preferred for sleep, or if the idea of softness was even prioritized. Some believe that wealthier Romans valued smooth fabrics like fine linen, not only for daytime comfort, but also for the sake of dreams. Soft cloth for soft visions, as one poem vaguely hints. Others argue that such distinctions were luxury overkill, and most Romans were simply practical dry, on terms good itchy, masser bad. And then there's the nightcap question. Did Romans wear anything on their heads to sleep? Most evidence says no, though there are some fun frescoes showing people reclining with headbands or cloth wraps, maybe to keep their hair neat, or just because everyone loves a cozy forehead hug. The jury's still out. Now picture yourself again. You're in your cubiculum, shutters closed, oil lamp flickering. You've slipped out of your day tunic and into a linen wrap. Or maybe nothing at all, it's your imagination after all. The air is cool against your skin. Your straw mattress crunches slightly as you lie back. You pull a woven blanket over your legs, feeling the gentle texture of wool that's been washed about 100 times and probably still smells faintly of sheep. You exhale. You relax. You wonder if your neighbor is sleeping in socks and then scold yourself for inventing a Roman sock. They did exist, but no one's sure if they wore them to bed. And here are your soft, sleep-ready chuckles for tonight. Somewhere in Rome, someone definitely sold night tunics that were exactly the same as day tunics, but cost twice as much. A philosopher probably wrote, "He who sleeps naked dreams only of truth." And someone else said he just forgot his laundry. The Roman version of sweatpants and a hoodie was likely a wrinkled toga and sandals with one strap broken. You're lying comfortably now, cloaked in whatever sleepwear or glorious lack thereof suits your Roman soul. The lamp has burned low, the night air settles cool against the stone, and your mind is almost ready to drift. But your body has other plans. Your eyelids droop, but your heart is pacing. Your thoughts, a parade of random centurions' unpaid taxes, and wait, did that fig taste weird? Congratulations. You, my friend, have ancient Roman insomnia. Tonight we remedy that literally. Welcome to Dreamy Remedies, a soft stroll through the Roman world of nighttime potions, sleepy herbs, and just a splash of chaos. Let's begin with the basics. Romans didn't have melatonin gummies, but they had poppy sap. Yes, poppies. From these delicate flowers came opium, known in its gentler medicinal form as papaver somniferum, a soothing syrup sometimes used in microdoses to lull the body into slumber. Doctors called it poppy wine, and if that doesn't sound both relaxing and mildly dangerous, you haven't read enough Latin medical scrolls. But it wasn't just poppies. Lavender, chamomile, mint, and fennel were common sleepy time favorites, brewed as teas steeped in bath water or tucked into pillows and scent pouches beneath one's nose. You might drift off beside a fragrant herb bundle that also repels mosquitoes. Practical and poetic. Now here's a quirky detail. Some Romans believed that sipping warm goat milk with honey before bed could not only help you sleep but sweeten your dreams. One recipe called for milk warmed 3 times, stirred clockwise with a bronze spoon, and sipped while whispering a tiny hymn to Somnus, the god of sleep. Yes, bedtime had rituals. And let's not forget Roman bath culture. For many, the real sedative was a hot evening bath. Whether at a public balneum or a private household tub, if you were lucky, it was the ultimate wind-down hot water sweat scraped off Stragil style and a dab of herb-infused oil. Hygiene, sure, but mostly it was Roman relaxation therapy. Some even burned frankincense or myrrh in small clay holders while reclining in bed. Watching the scented smoke spiral up to the ceiling was a kind of sensory lullaby. Well, unless you were allergic, ancient physicians were famously silent on pollen counts. And if all that failed, enter amulets. For many, sleeplessness wasn't a physical problem, it was spiritual. A restless night might mean a spirit was lingering, or worse, that the gods were displeased. The solution, a charm beneath your pillow, a carved bone token, a sliver of amber, or a small stone etched with protective words. Some even kept tiny figurines of Somnus himself curled like a baby on a marble bed. One preserved inscription reads dramatically, "To sleep I place this shell of the sea beside me, for it knows the tides of dreams." Poetic? Weird. Very Roman. Let's dip into the scholarly side. Some historians believe Roman doctors genuinely understood sleep hygiene. They recommended quiet rooms, warm baths, and light meals not just from tradition, but observation. Others argue most treatments were symbolic rituals that worked because people believed they worked. In other words, ancient placebo now in a toga. You, of course, are trying everything. You've tied a linen pouch of chamomile and fennel around your neck. You've sipped honeyed milk. You even mumbled something vaguely respectful to Somnus. The room is dim. The only sounds are your breath and the distant click of sandals echoing down stone alleys. And still, your mind hums. So you turn to the final remedy: storytelling. Yes, even Romans knew the magic of a bedtime tale. Told in a low, steady voice by a trusted servant or read from a scroll by candlelight, they were not grand epics too exciting, but soft, slow stories of country life, quiet myths or sleepy ancestors who always napped under fig trees. You imagine someone telling you the tale of Endymion, the eternal sleeper kissed nightly by the moon, or of a fisherman who dreamed he was a dolphin. Or maybe just a story about a quiet bath, a warm bed, and a linen sheet that smelled faintly of time and peace. And as you finally begin to drift, just as your thoughts blur into the edges of sleep, you hear three sleepy chuckles in your mind. Somewhere in Rome, a man definitely overdosed on poppy wine and declared himself the god of naps. The Roman version of counting sheep was reciting emperors backward. Try it, it gets weird after Tiberius. A street herbalist probably sold guaranteed dream pillows that just smelled aggressively like garlic. Sleep optional. You're resting deeper now. The poppy wine imaginary though it may be is working. The air smells faintly of lavender and goat, and your thoughts drift somewhere between, did I pay my grain tax, and why was that dolphin speaking Greek in my dream? But just as your mind begins to drift, your hand brushes against something odd, a small charm tied with faded twine, tucked beneath your pillow. You forgot about it, didn't you? But you're not the only one. Tonight we enter the wonderfully bizarre and surprisingly crowded realm of bedtime superstitions, because in ancient Rome, sleep wasn't just rest. It was a nightly negotiation with spirits' dreams and whatever invisible forces lurked in the corners of the cubiculum. Let's begin with the basics. Romans were deeply superstitious. Not always in chaotic ways, though sometimes, but in the kind of way that made bedtime feel like a sacred ritual. You didn't just lie down and close your eyes, you arranged your space with care. Maybe you muttered a blessing. Maybe you checked the moon. Maybe you made sure your head wasn't facing north, because everyone knew that's where wandering spirits like to enter. And your feet never faced the door. That's how the dead are laid out. You wouldn't want to accidentally invite anything in, would you? Enter the charms. Tiny protective items were popular across all classes. They weren't always fancy. Some were simple carved bones, others small bits of bronze inscribed with protective phrases like ab insomnio liberare me, free me from sleeplessness. Some were shaped like eyes. Other, well, let's just say the Romans didn't shy away from using certain anatomical motifs to frighten off bad energy. Nothing says stay away like an aggressively carved phallus. And these amulets didn't just protect against ghosts, they guarded against bad dreams. Nightmares were taken seriously: omens, magical attacks, or warnings from the gods. If you woke up sweaty and convinced a donkey chased you across the Tiber, you might spend the morning consulting a dream interpreter and scrubbing your feet with salt. Naturally, here's your quirky detail of the night. One preserved tablet from the countryside describes a woman who placed a small clay frog beneath her mattress, believing it would absorb the moisture of wicked thoughts. She was either completely wrong about frogs or a low-key genius. But perhaps the most infamous superstition was the incubus, a spirit believed to sit on your chest and steal your breath while you slept. Sound familiar? It's ancient sleep paralysis. The Romans called it ephialtes, or later nocturnus demon. If you woke frozen, gasping, and unable to speak, it wasn't your nervous system. It was a creature, a shadow, and you needed help. So came the rituals: a sprig of rue near the bed, salt in your sandals, a whispered prayer to Somnus or Mercury. Even the way you wrapped your blanket could matter. Some swore by tight wrapping to block entry points for spirits. Ancient weighted blanket logic with bonus ghost protection. Now, the scholarly debate: were these superstitions part of religion or just family traditions? Some believe bedtime rituals tied into household cults, offerings to Lares and Peanettes, the gods of home and hearth. Others argue these were just personal customs passed down by superstitious grandmothers with opinions and herbs. Either way, one thing's certain: Romans treated sleep as a threshold, a place where things could cross from either side. And you, of course, take it seriously. You tuck the charm back under your pillow. You turn your head so it doesn't face north. You double-check the door. And just for good measure, you whisper a nonsense rhyme in terrible Latin because maybe the spirits appreciate effort. The room stills. The air hums with time and terracotta. You breathe in. You let go. And just before sleep takes you, three eerie little chuckles float into your dreams. Somewhere in Rome, someone absolutely blamed a bad haircut on a nightmare demon. It was the nocturnus demon, I swear. The frog under the bed lady. She probably sold frog-based sleep kits at the Forum. Guaranteed moist thought protection. A sleepy senator definitely woke up mid-dream and banned his own pillow, just to be safe. You're drifting off at last. The linen beneath you has softened with your weight, the air is calm, and the charm under your pillow now feels comforting rather than creepy. Then suddenly a sound, a low rhythmic, vaguely thunderous rumble. It's not the gods, it's not a marching legion. It's not even another donkey parade, it's snoring, loud, unapologetic Roman snoring. Tonight, dear dreamer, we dive deep into the snore debate, because yes, even in ancient Rome, people argued over whether snoring was a sign of strength or just deeply annoying. Let's start with the basics. Romans didn't have CPAP machines, or earplugs, or polite phrases like, "He's just a heavy sleeper." What they did have were opinions, strong ones. In some circles, snoring was seen as a sign of vitality. Big chest, big breath, big noise. It meant you slept deeply, your body was healthy, and the wine had properly settled your humors. Some physicians even claimed that light sleepers were untrustworthy too, anxious, too calculating. But a snorer, that person trusted the universe and his bed to keep him safe. Of course, not everyone agreed. One poet compared the snore of a sleeping senator to the groan of a temple door left ungreased. Another likened his roommate's nightly orchestra to a bull drowning in a barrel of olives. Harsh, but realistic, because snoring was everywhere. Think about it, insula walls were paper-thin, families often shared sleeping spaces, and ventilation almost non-existent. If someone snored, everyone knew it, and no one forgot. There's even a comedic play in which two characters argue about whose father snored louder. One claims his dad made a dog run away from home. The other insists a single nostril exhale cracked a clay cup. Classic Roman family bonding. Now here's your quirky detail of the night: wealthy Romans, fearing the social embarrassment of snoring, occasionally hired snore watchers. Yes, servants whose job was to gently nudge their master when the nocturnal trumpet began. Softly, respectfully, just enough to break the rhythm, but not enough to wake. Sir, your nostril chorus is upsetting the houseplants again. Desperate for silence, some Romans tried questionable home remedies. Sleeping with a wedge under the chin, drinking mint-infused vinegar before bed. One philosopher even suggested sleeping with a pebble in your mouth to balance the throat. No one's sure if it worked, but it definitely sounds like a choking hazard waiting to happen. This brings us to a more serious layer: the social politics of snoring. In elite households, snoring was tolerated barely. You had your own room, maybe a distant wing of the villa, where your nasal vibrations could rattle in peace. But in shared quarters, among slaves, soldiers, students in cramped dormitories, snoring could spark fights, insults, or dramatic nighttime exits. One writer claimed he had to flee a friend's countryside villa because the night brought not owls but oaths. Translation: someone snored and everyone else cursed. From an academic lens, was snoring tied to moral character? Some scholars argue that loud sleep noises implied poor self-discipline. If you couldn't control your breath, how could you govern a city? Others say snoring was just part of life, annoying. Yes, but ultimately laughable. Something you wrote jokes about or learned to live with. One interesting theory: military barracks. Some accounts suggest seasoned soldiers snored more, possibly from exhaustion, broken noses, or battle-scarred lungs. Younger recruits, annoyed but respectful, saw it as a badge of honor. "He's seen war," they'd whisper, and heard none of it. He was snoring too loudly. You, meanwhile, are listening to someone through the wall unleash an unsolicited nasal symphony in 3 acts. You consider throwing your pillow, then remember it's full of hay and not very aerodynamic. Instead, you pull your linen wrap tighter and imagine yourself drifting down the Tiber on a raft made of silence. Sleep is coming. Slowly. If the snoring doesn't win, your own exhaustion will. And as your eyelids droop, here are three gentle snores of laughter to send you off. Somewhere in Rome, someone absolutely blamed a failed romance on his snoring. She said it reminded her of siege machines. A Roman doctor once recommended breathing like a calm ox to prevent snoring. No one knew what that meant. The phrase silentium queso, silence please, was probably shouted most often at bedtime, with a sandal in hand. You've made it through the night again barely. Between your snoring neighbor, the clinking charms, and your own overactive imagination conjuring toga-wearing ghosts, it's a miracle you slept at all. But dawn has arrived. The air smells of baking bread and yesterday's fish. You stretch, yawn, and wait. Is that the scent of roses? No, you haven't been transported to a dream. You've simply woken up in a senator's guest room. Tonight we indulge in nap like a senator, a rare and well-cushioned glimpse into the sleep habits of the Roman elite. And trust me, they were living the soft life. You've been invited to a villa. Not just any villa, but a sprawling countryside estate where the marble tiles are cool underfoot and every corridor smells faintly of bay leaves and self-importance. You're shown to your guest room by a servant who's far too polite to mention your dusty sandals. The bed, not a pile of straw. Oh no. It's a raised platform, bed-wide, firm, draped in imported linens. The mattress is stuffed with wool. The headrest, monogrammed. Because here sleep isn't just a necessity, it's a statement. Elite Romans were in a word extra. Their bedroom's cubicula were designed to impress even while unconscious. Think colored mosaics, frescoed walls, oil lamps with flame-dancing shadows and air scented with rose or frankincense, thanks to servants swinging censers like incense DJs. And the nap routine, a delicate ritual. After the heavy prandium, let's say roasted dormice, honeyed carrots, and too much Falernian wine, a proper senator didn't just plop onto a bed. He glided. First a wardrobe change into something soft and flowing, then a splash of rosewater. Finally, a graceful recline onto his lectus genialis, a sleeping couch draped in silk just so. There might be a servant fanning him gently. There might be someone reading aloud. If you're particularly lucky, the senator himself may offer to read his latest Stoic reflections. You pretend to be impressed, even as your brain quietly slips toward unconsciousness. Now for tonight's quirky highlight, some senators had dedicated nap rooms. Not full bedrooms, just nap zones. Small, cool, windowless chambers designed solely for a midday snooze. Imagine a spa minus cucumbers, plus ego. And yes, the Hipparcos system, Rome's radiant underfloor heating, was often extended into these nap sanctuaries. Because nothing says power like heated tiles beneath your well-fed toes while peasants are freezing in the atrium. But this wasn't just about comfort. To nap like this was political. Midday rest signaled that you were powerful enough to not be needed, that your time was valuable, that your thoughts were grand, that your schedule obeyed you. In short, the senatorial snooze was a quiet rebellion against hustle culture, a deeply perfumed flex. Of course, not everyone admired this lifestyle. Younger or more cynical Romans mocked elite nap culture. What did they dream of, one poet snarked? New ways to name months after themselves. To be fair, they did. Now, for a bit of academic spice, historians debate whether these elite naps were truly restful or ceremonial. Did senators actually sleep or just recline, meditate, and wait to be interrupted? Some letters suggest these naps doubled as thinking time. Others, well, Pliny the Elder once admitted to falling asleep during dictation and waking to someone still scribbling. So clearly multitasking naps were alive and well. You've grown used to the soft murmur of elite napping, silk sheets, rosewater dreams, philosophical foot rubs. Ah, luxury. But tonight the bed is gone. The scent of roses replaced by sweat straw and something faintly resembling boiled turnip. Because tonight, you're not napping like a senator. You're sleeping like a slave. Let's shift perspectives. You're in a domus or Roman household, and you're not the guest. You're not the host. You're not even the topic of polite conversation. You are the labor, the background. The hands that prepared the senator's nap then vanished before his eyes opened. It's late. You've swept the courtyard, scrubbed the mosaics with vinegars until your fingers wrinkled, and prepped the dough for tomorrow's bread. Your back aches. You yawn, but you don't head to a bed because you don't have one. Most Roman slaves, especially household ones, slept wherever there was space. A dark corner in the kitchen, under the stairs, next to the hearth, Or if it's winter, curled near the animal pens for warmth. Your mattress, maybe a piece of old cloth, maybe the bare floor. Your blanket, your tunic, doubled over. Barely enough to cover your knees, privacy, no such thing. You might be wedged between five others, each snoring, shifting, grumbling in their sleep, or whispering stories to chase away the cold. Here's the thing, Roman slaves worked from sunup to long after sundown. Sleep wasn't scheduled, it was stolen. A quick nap during a quiet moment. A few minutes rest if the master was out, and always with one ear open, in case someone needed water, or wine, or a less talkative lyre player. And yet, somehow you adapt. Some slaves learned to nap in moments, to wake at the slightest shift. Others whispered bedtime tales and the dark stories of better days, or imaginary villas where everyone had their own blanket, and no one dusted Neptune statues at midnight. Now for tonight's quirky detail, in large wealthy households, some slaves were body servants assigned to sleep near the master just in case. These poor souls might be curled at the foot of the bed, or on a mat beside the door, alert for a cough, a bell, or a grunt of dissatisfaction. One account tells of a noblewoman who insisted her maid sleep with one hand resting on her ankle, just so she could feel someone was always there. That's not a job, that's a full-time nightmare with wrist strain. And as rough as house slaves had it, field slaves had it worse. They slept in barns, communal huts, sometimes under the stars, huddled together like mismatched laundry with a pulse. No privacy, no cushion. And in winter, no warmth but each other's exhaustion. And here comes the quiet truth. For elite Romans, sleep was a gift of the gods, refinement, beauty, luxury. But for slaves, sleep was a pause, a stolen breath, a few borrowed hours of stillness before morning demanded more. Now, scholars debate just how harsh slave sleep conditions were. Some argue that house slaves had basic bedding, maybe even shared rooms with others. Others insist that between surveillance fear and constant demands, even those meager comforts felt hollow. But one thing is clear, sleep for the enslaved was conditional. It could be taken, it was never truly yours. And yet, despite all of that, they dreamed. Dreams weren't owned by masters. No one could tax them. In the dark under ragged tunics and beside dusty stairwells, slaves dreamed freely. Of family, of freedom, of a softer bed. You lie now on a woven mat, rough, cold. Your arms are sore, your feet ache, your eyelids fall because they must. Someone coughs, someone sighs, someone whispers a joke. You curl in, you imagine something better, and in that stolen moment, no one owns your sleep. Tonight you don't sleep outside, you don't curl up next to a goat, you don't huddle beneath a stairwell or use your tunic as a blanket. Tonight, you walk barefoot across cool tiles toward a private room. No one else is there. The door clicks softly behind you. A small oil lamp glows. There's even a window. Welcome to architecture of rest, because in ancient Rome, sleep didn't just depend on your class or your clothing. It depended on the very shape of the room around you. Let's begin in the domus, the classic Roman home for the well-off. Not all bedrooms' cubicula were created equal. In fact, they were small, surprisingly so. Often no bigger than a modern walk-in closet. And for good reason, this wasn't where you entertained guests. This wasn't where you wrote poetry, composed letters, or shouted at accountants. This was where you slept, or dressed, or maybe whispered dramatic things to yourself in the dark. What mattered wasn't space, it was design. Most sleeping chambers were placed strategically tucked deep inside the house, far from the front atrium, and even farther from the dining room, where someone's uncle was probably still ranting about olive tariffs. The walls thick, sometimes layered in plaster or even stone, perfect for regulating temperature and muffling noise. The windows tiny slits, if there were any at all. Glass was rare, expensive, and not particularly insulating. So many Romans used mica, a translucent mineral that let in soft light but kept out the wind. Now here's tonight's quirky detail. Some Roman bedrooms were designed to be completely windowless. Why? Because darkness was considered luxurious. In a world lit by flame, noisy by nature, and rarely silent, a room without light was the ultimate flex. You could sleep past sunrise, you could pretend the party outside didn't exist. You could dream in peace, and if you were especially rich, your sleep quarters weren't a bedroom. They were a sleep suite, a cubiculum nocturnum for nighttime, a cubiculum diurnum for naps, maybe even a personal balneum, a private bath chamber, so you could rinse away your worries before tucking in. That's not a bedroom, that's a sleep empire. Even moderately wealthy Romans paid attention to architecture. Some cubicula had raised platforms to keep beds warm in winter. Others featured curved alcoves so the bed fit snugly, like an architectural hug. And the bed, it wasn't shoved against the wall. Oh no. It stood centered sometimes beneath a decorative canopy, not for privacy. Just to say, yes, I own this much room. Meanwhile, across the city, poorer Romans, those renting space in a crowded insula, made do. These apartment buildings were tall, flammable, and built fast. 5 to 7 stories of wooden beams, thin floors, and neighbors who cooked fish at all hours. Still, people adapted. They raised their mats on wooden planks to avoid the cold. They hung cloth to divide sleeping spaces. Some even carved alcoves into the walls, tiny havens of illusioned privacy, no bigger than a cupboard. Because sleep, it turns out, can be architected with even the humblest tools. Now, the academic whisper, did Romans design their bedrooms to actually improve sleep? Or were they just flexing? Some scholars argue that the cubiculum was more about symbolism than science, a marker of wealth and order, not necessarily comfort. Others suggest Romans understood something essential, that darkness, quiet temperature, and privacy shaped sleep long before melatonin gummies and YouTube rain sounds. Either way, the room cradles you. The walls are thick, the lamp is low, and your mind is a soft clay bowl waiting to be filled with dreams. But you wonder as you lie there wrapped in darkness, how did the Romans know when to wake? There were no digital alarms, no snooze buttons, no passive-aggressive phone vibrations, and yet they rose with the day, most of the time. Tonight we unravel the mystery of the first alarm clocks, or rather how Romans managed to wake up before oversleeping, their political ambitions, gladiator matches, or slightly burned breakfast bread. Let's start with nature's alarm light. The Roman world was ruled by the sun. The day was divided into 12 hours of daylight and 12 of night, but those hours weren't fixed. In summer, daylight hours stretched. In winter, they shrank. A Roman 6 o'clock wasn't always your 6 o'clock, but sunrise. That was consistent enough to build a routine around. So many Romans rose with dawn, not by choice, but by necessity. The change in light, the growing noise of the city, and the complete absence of blackout curtains served as a reliable nudge to get moving. But that wasn't the only method. Enter the rooster. Yes, the feathery cliché. Chickens were common across Roman households and farms. The rooster gallus in Latin was seen as a natural timekeeper. Some Roman writers even praised him as a soldier of the sun, waking citizens with irritating yet consistent punctuality. No batteries required. But what if you lived in a noisy insula with no chickens? Then you needed other tricks. One of the cleverest, the clepsydra, or water clock. A large ceramic or metal vessel filled with water, dripping slowly from one container to another. Time was measured by the rising or lowering water level, sometimes using a float or stick marked with lines. Some versions were sophisticated enough to chime or whistle when the water reached a certain level. Now here's your quirky highlight. Some Roman night guards used clepsydras with metal bowls placed strategically below. When the water overflowed, ping, instant wake-up call. The ancient Roman equivalent of an iPhone alarm, but soggier. Another tool, the hourglass, though more common in public settings like speeches, court cases, or games. Not quite precise for private morning rituals, but for the rich timekeeping, came with legs. Enter the human alarm clock. That's right, certain household slaves were tasked with waking their masters, maybe before dawn, maybe at the third hour, maybe just before bathwater was drawn. The method a whisper, a soft nudge, maybe a damp cloth applied strategically. Unconfirmed, but sounds plausible. Now, how accurate were these methods, scholars still debate. Some believe Romans had a deeply honed internal sense of time. Others say, be serious. And they point to Roman comedies full of jokes about oversleeping and missing important events. One play features a character yelling, "By Pluto's beard, I've missed the opening parade," a feeling we still understand. And what about everyone else, the non-rich? The field hands, the bakers, the soldiers. Bakers often rose hours before sunrise. They relied on muscle memory, background noise, and cold water splashed on the face. Soldiers responded to horns or trumpet blasts during the changing of the guard. Farmers woke to the sound of livestock or the first hint of light on the horizon. And if you overslept, you missed deals, you missed duties. Or worse, you arrived late to the public bath and found only cold water and judgmental glances. But you're lucky tonight. No chickens, no dripping bowls, no whispering servant with a damp sponge, just the hush of the night, the warm drift of air. and the soft promise that when the sun rises, you'll feel it on your face, and that will be enough. You wake not to a rooster or dripping clepsydra, but to the sound of steam. A faint hissing, a bubbling, and a soft hollow splash, followed by a servant mumbling something about the caldrium being ready. Because tonight you're about to experience something very few of us have: the midnight bath. Let's be clear, Romans loved bathing. They weren't just hygienic about it, they were theatrical. Baths weren't merely for cleanliness. They were social centers, business lounges, even dating arenas. But at night, the bathhouse took on a very different mood. While most public thermae closed at sunset, some private bathhouses, especially those in wealthy villas, remained open long into the night. And for those who suffered from restlessness, indigestion, or just a flair for the dramatic, a warm soak after dark was an indulgence. It was therapy. Tonight you've been invited to just such a session. You step into the apoditerium, the changing room where your sandals are taken and your tunic is folded with reverent efficiency. The floor is cool under your feet, the oil lamps flicker with orange light, and the air smells faintly of pine resin and crushed rosemary. Your host, let's call him Marcus, waves lazily from a marble bench, already wrapped in a towel, and looking smugly relaxed. You enter the tepidarium, first the warm room. It's cozy. Your skin prickles. Your muscles unclench. There's no loud conversation here, just whispers, sighs, and the occasional slosh of water being ladled over a shoulder. You lean against the wall and listen to the soft echo of dripping pipes. Then comes the caldarium, the hot room. This is where the magic happens. The heat is thick, like soup. You sit near the edge of the pool, watching steam curl up into the vaulted ceiling like smoke from a dreaming god. Someone hums gently. Someone else drizzles oil on a shoulder and scrapes it away with a strigil. And for a moment you understand why Marcus does this every single night. It's not about being clean, it's about melting into stillness. Here's the quirky detail of the night some bathers swore by midnight: bathing as a cure for insomnia. Warm water soothed the body, cleared the mind, and prepared the soul for deeper sleep. One philosopher even claimed he couldn't sleep unless he felt boiled like a wise fish. We assume that was metaphorical. And it wasn't just men. Wealthy Roman women also enjoyed late-night baths, though often in private chambers or with close friends. These sessions sometimes included music, massages, and stories. One account describes a woman requesting that an attendant read her Virgil while she soaked. Multitasking Roman edition. Of course, midnight bathing wasn't without hazards. Steamy floors could be slippery, lamps could sputter out, and one famous senator reportedly fell asleep in the caldarium and had to be fished out like a very relaxed sea cucumber. Still, the tradition persisted, especially for those with wealth worry or weird sleeping schedules. Now, for the scholarly puzzle, did late-night bathing actually help? Some historians argue yes, pointing to the physiological effects of post-bath body temperature drop, which align with modern sleep science. Others suggest it was just habit or even boredom in disguise. Whatever the reason, it worked. For those who practiced it, the bath became a sacred ritual. Not the start of the day, but the end. A gentle descent into unconsciousness aided by oil heat and faint gossip. You don't open your eyes right away. There's a sweetness in the silence, a softness to the light behind your lids. You feel the afterglow of dreams like mist still clinging to your skin. Somewhere distant footsteps echo through a hallway. A servant shifts a curtain. Birds chirp outside in lazy musical bursts. But within you, the garden still lingers. The dolphin senator, the flying olives, the whispering fig trees. You remember. And in ancient Rome, that meant something. Romans were obsessive dream recorders, especially when dreams felt important. Some kept wax tablets beside the bed to jot notes as soon as they awoke. Others murmured the dream aloud so they wouldn't lose it before breakfast. There was even advice: don't speak to anyone before recalling your dream. It might scare the memory away. So you sit up. You reach for your stylus and tablet. You scrawl feast of pillows, winged sandals, dolphin with opinions, olive storm, Minerva, knitting smell of rosemary still strong. This wasn't just nonsense. This was omens in the rough to be polished and examined. In Rome, interpretation came next. You might go over the dream in your head during your morning grooming, combing your hair, oiling your skin, getting dressed. If the dream was especially weird, and let's face it, you might consult a friend. Or if you were wealthy and appropriately theatrical, you could even call in an oniromancer, a dream interpreter. And don't forget the books. Artemidorus Onerocritica, yes, actual name, laid out the meanings of hundreds of dream symbols. Did you dream of flying glory awaits? Of water depends on clarity. Of figs interpret cautiously. You dreamed of talking lions. So that's a chapter and a half minimum. Here's your quirky detail. Romans also believed that some dreams didn't belong to the dreamer at all. They were messages meant for someone else. If you dreamed of your friend dying, you'd tell them sometimes nervously, sometimes smugly, depending on the nature of your friendship. I had a dream about your funeral last night. Thought you should know. Because sharing was protection, secrets festered, omens warned. Now back to you. The dream has faded a bit, but not completely. You rise, you wrap yourself in your robe. You walk into the atrium where morning light pours like honey. Your host Marcus is already seated with a cup of watered wine and half a smile. You dream he asks, eyes half closed. You nod. There were cats, racing chariots. He sips. Ah, must be market day. So you begin the morning not with facts but with feeling, with figures made of smoke and meaning, with the soft conviction that your dream meant something, even if you'll never know quite what. Because in the Roman world, dreaming wasn't an escape from life. It was part of it. And now, dear listener, the lamp has flickered out. The dreams have quieted. The stone walls around you have softened into shadows, and the city of Rome, restless and ancient, has finally gently exhaled. You've traveled far tonight, through pebble-warmed beds and perfumed pillows, through midday naps and midnight baths. You've wandered the alleys of superstition, dipped into steaming chambers, and brushed past snoring senators. You've listened to lions speak Latin in dreams and watched dolphins wear togas. All of this just beneath the blanket of Roman sleep. And now it's your turn to rest. Let the noise of the past grow faint. Let the crackle of the oil lamp become a whisper. Let your breath slow and your thoughts fall into soft rhythms. You've done enough for today. You've explored enough. You've been enough. Let your pillow carry you. Let the darkness hold you kindly. And if you should dream, may it be sweet, strange, and just the right amount of ridiculous. That's the story for tonight. May your dreams be filled with wonder and peace. Hey friends, tonight, let's explore a Greek myth that redefines the phrase sleeping beauty. Though to be fair, he doesn't do much except lie down and be unreasonably attractive. We're talking about Endymion, shepherd, astronomer, napper, extraordinaire, and perhaps the only man to achieve immortality simply by staying in bed. So before you relax, take a second to like and subscribe if you find value in what we share. And feel free to comment your location and the time where you are. We love knowing who's tuning in under which stars. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're lying on a hillside under a moonlit sky. The grass beneath you is soft. The air smells of thyme and cool stone, and the only sound is the whisper of olive trees shifting slightly in the night breeze. Somewhere nearby, sheep are sleeping more soundly than you. You stretch. You exhale. You look up and see her. Selene, the moon goddess. She floats gently through the sky in her chariot of silver light, pulled by pale, silent horses. Her eyes find yours, and just like that, everything changes. Or rather, everything pauses. Because from this moment on, you, dear Endymion, are destined to sleep. Forever. Let's rewind a little. According to one of many versions of the myth, Endymion is a mortal of rare beauty. Not just village handsome, we're talking celestial level jawline symmetry. He tends sheep by day, studies the stars by night, and apparently moisturizes with something divine because Selene, goddess of the moonkeeper of lunar light, part-time stalker, falls madly in love with him. And what does she do? Does she write him a poem, send him a moonbeam bouquet? No, she puts him to sleep, like forever. Now, historians and mythologists debate how this actually happened. Some say Zeus offered Endymion the choice of eternal youth through eternal sleep. Others claim Selene asked Zeus for the favor so she could visit her beloved without him ever aging or objecting. Either way, the result is the same. Our handsome sleeper is preserved in a perpetual state of slumber. Here's your historical fact for the night. In classical Greece, sleep hypnos wasn't just rest, it was sacred. The Greeks personified sleep as a god hypnos and believed dreams were messages from the divine. A beautiful sleeping man untouched by time. That was the very image of peace and perfection. No wonder Selene fell head over sandals. Here's your quirky detail. Some versions of the story say Endymion slept with his eyes open. Yes, open. Imagine being eternally unconscious but still technically staring into space. The stuff of peaceful myth or low-key horror. You decide. So how did the people of ancient Greece respond to this sleepy tale with temples? Endymion was venerated in certain parts of Greece, particularly in Elis and Caria, where locals believed he rested in a cave. Pilgrims would visit bringing offerings, perhaps in hopes of absorbing some of his beauty peace, or frankly, enviable sleep quality. If today's influencers could brand a mattress Endymion approved, it would sell out in minutes. Now let's gently open the debate. Was Endymion's eternal sleep a reward or a curse? Some say it was bliss. No aging, no death, just an endless dream where the love of a goddess visits you nightly. Sounds nice, until you realize what's missing. Endymion never gets to live. He doesn't eat honey cakes. He doesn't dance at Dionysus parties. He doesn't get to wake up and say, hey, Selene, maybe we should talk about this relationship dynamic. It's the ancient equivalent of being placed in airplane mode for eternity. You lie still imagining the soft cave walls where Endymion rests. The air is cool, the stone is smooth beneath your back, and above you the moon rises slowly, patiently. She watches him. Night after night, never tired of the view. You think about how strange and quiet that must be. To be loved that much, to be seen but never spoken to be touched gently by moonlight but never truly awake. The moon drifts quietly across the sky, and you still lying in the gentle hills of myth, find yourself wondering, what does one do in eternal sleep? Does Endymion dream? Does he roll over? Does he snore like a polite philosopher? Tonight you slip deeper into his world and learn that for Endymion, sleep isn't just a state of being, it's practically a career. Welcome to the Art of Sleeping Deeply, where you discover what it means to make rest an identity. First, let's clear up something important. Endymion isn't asleep like someone who just had too much wine and passed out on the temple steps. No, his sleep is sacred, suspended, and possibly celestial in origin. Think less napping uncle and more enchanted marble sculpture with excellent cheekbones. And that's not just poetic exaggeration. The Greeks viewed certain kinds of sleep as divine states close to prophecy, close to gods, and even closer to death. But you know, in a cozy way, the idea that someone could be so beautiful, so pure, that even time would politely wait for him to finish his nap, that's mythological gold. Let's pause for tonight's historical truth. In ancient Greek culture, sleep was closely associated with prophecy. Many temples, especially those dedicated to Asclepius, the god of healing, had rituals involving incubation or sleeping in the sacred spaces to receive dreams from the gods. Pilgrims would lie down on sacred animal skins in the temple and hope the god would visit their dreams to offer advice, healing, or perhaps a surprisingly detailed meal plan. So when you hear that Endymion slept forever, understand that his state wasn't just rest. It was sacralized rest, a form of divine stasis that blurred the lines between sleep and worship. To sleep like Endymion was to touch eternity but softly, without alarms, without taxes. Now here's your quirky detail. In one version of the myth, Endymion isn't just sleeping, he's sleeping on Mount Latmos, a real mountain in modern-day Turkey. People used to climb it, hoping to find the cave where he lay. Some said you could still hear him breathing if you pressed your ear to the rock. Others claimed Selene's chariot left wheel marks in the sky above the summit. You can't make this up, except they did. So you picture it now, Endymion nestled in a moonlit cave wrapped in air that never changes skin, untouched by sun or age. He sleeps not because he's lazy, not because he's cursed, but because his very sleep means something. Maybe you start to wonder, what did he do before this? Was he always sleepy? Did he yawn dramatically at banquets? Did he once fall asleep during a lecture on chariot axle design and never quite wake up? Scholars don't agree on who Endymion was before Selene found him. Some say he was a shepherd. Others say he was a prince or even an astronomer who spent so many nights watching the moon that the moon watched back. And here's where we open a small debate. Did Endymion choose this? Some versions say yes, Zeus offered him eternal youth through sleep and he accepted. Others say it was thrust upon him, perhaps by Selene's overzealous love or the gods' meddling. So was he a willing sleeper or a beautiful hostage in a silk-lined cave? You don't get a firm answer. Just like most myths, the story changes depending on who's telling it. But you do get a feeling of stillness, of calm, of being so fully at rest that even time curls up beside you and takes a nap. And here comes a little theory. Maybe the Greeks created Endymion as a kind of aspiration. In a world full of noise, war speeches, and sandals that never quite fit, maybe they dreamed of someone who didn't have to do, who just was, who lay down and remained beautiful, admired, and untouched. Maybe he's not a lesson, but a wish. You sigh, imagining that peaceful cave again. There's something comforting about the idea, even if you know you'd probably get bored by week 3. But for now tonight, you let yourself sink into the idea of sleeping like Endymion timeless, dreamful and gently admired from a very respectful distance. The night stretches gently onward, and you're still floating in that mythic stillness where time has forgotten to tick. The cave is cool. The moonlight falls like silk, and Endymion, unsurprisingly, is still asleep. But just because he's unconscious doesn't mean nothing's happening. In fact, someone is very busy. Tonight we turn our gaze upward and sideways into the skies where Selene, the goddess of the moon, glides silently in her silver chariot, night after night to visit the man who never wakes. Welcome to Gods in Long Distance Love, a story of celestial romance with absolutely no texting and a highly one-sided conversation schedule. Selene, daughter of the Titan Hyperion, isn't your average moon goddess. She doesn't just glow, she governs. She brings light to the night, calms the tides, and apparently has a soft spot for dreamy shepherds. And when she sees Endymion stretched out beneath her light, she doesn't just pass by. She falls in love. Deeply. Cosmically. Repeatedly. And that's where things get complicated. Let's pause for tonight's historical nugget. In ancient Greek religion, gods falling in love with mortals was almost its own genre. Zeus had a whole collection. Aphrodite wasn't shy either. But Selene's story is unusual for its quietness. She doesn't seduce, threaten, or transform. She just watches and visits and returns again and again with patience that borders on poetic obsession. Now here's your quirky detail. Some versions of the myth say Selene bore 50 daughters with Endymion. 50. How, you might ask, does one produce children with someone who is asleep for eternity? The myths, as always, are a little vague on the mechanics. Some say Endymion was allowed to wake briefly. Others suggest that sleep in this context was more symbolic than strict. And others, probably the cheekiest ancient poets, simply raised an eyebrow and moved on because, hey, it's myth. It doesn't have to make sense. It just has to sparkle under moonlight. But what's fascinating is the tone of this myth. Selene's love isn't portrayed as tragic or dramatic, it's tender, ritualistic. A nightly act of devotion. She rides her chariot across the sky, descends quietly, and brushes his face with light. There's something soft here, even if it's deeply strange. You might be thinking, why doesn't she just wake him up? Surely a goddess could snap her fingers and have a conversation, a shared meal, maybe a little celestial pillow talk. But that's where the myth resists logic. Selene doesn't want him to wake. His sleep is the very thing that preserves his beauty, his youth, his stillness. To wake him would be to change him. And Selene, it seems, doesn't want change. She wants preservation. A perfect moment looped forever. And here we reach our academic debate: is Selene's love devotion or control? Some scholars read the myth as a meditation on immortal desire, the way gods long for something mortal and unchanging. Others read it as a cautionary tale hinting at how love can become possessive when it's afraid of loss. Still others argue it's a metaphor for the moon itself, ever circling, ever present, watching over the earth in silent affection. You lie back, staring at the imagined ceiling of the cave. Somewhere far above, a wheel turns. Silver hooves land softly on clouds. The goddess leans close, not to whisper, not to wake, but simply to be near. Every night, without fail. It's strange, yes, but also gentle. A love that doesn't demand, a presence that doesn't speak. Just the quiet loyalty of light returning to the same place again and again. And what about Endymion? Maybe he dreams of her. Maybe in his endless slumber, he's aware of the visits, the touch of starlight on his skin, the scent of myrrh trailing from her robes. Maybe in his dreamscape they dance. Or maybe not. Maybe he sleeps alone, unknowing, untouched by everything but time's slow breath. And still she comes back. The sky shifts again. The stars spin slowly and the moon returns to its place. You're still wrapped in the quiet hum of Endymion's eternal nap. But tonight we tilt our view just slightly to what happens around him. Because while Endymion sleeps, things keep happening. Things like kisses, myths, and maybe too many children. Tonight's story is Wages of a Sleeping Heartthrob, where we gently question what happens when sleep turns into something a little more productive. Let's begin with something that would make modern romance novelists do a double-take. Selene and Endymion have 50 daughters. Yes, 50. Now, in modern terms, this would be called a lot. In mythology, it's practically a franchise. And these daughters aren't just background characters. Some myths name them as the Menai, a group of lunar spirits or personifications of the 50 lunar months of the four-year Olympiad calendar. Yes, you heard that right. Selene may have turned her love life into a calendar system. Now here's tonight's historical detail. The Greeks, especially during the classical and Hellenistic periods, were obsessed with celestial movements. The moon wasn't just a glowing orb, it was a timekeeper. So linking Selene's children with the lunar calendar, that's more than poetic, it's practical. The myth becomes a kind of dreamy timekeeping mechanism. And now for your delightfully quirky detail, some sources suggest that Selene visited Endymion every night to kiss him. That's right, 50 children and nightly check-ins. It's the ancient Greek version of both a long-term relationship and a very efficient sleep study. You start to wonder, does she ever skip a night? Does she ever say, not tonight, I have a solar eclipse to oversee? Apparently not. That's devotion or at least outstanding scheduling. Of course, the idea of a man who contributes so much to the family while literally unconscious raises questions. Is Endymion the ultimate example of passive fatherhood? Is he dreaming of family picnics on moonbeams? Or is he entirely unaware of the entire lunar legacy being built in his name? Here's where the debate heats up quietly, of course, because this is still bedtime. Some scholars interpret Endymion's myth as symbolic of the fertile earth under the moonlight. Selene fertilizes the land with her presence, and Endymion, the ever-sleeping earth, receives her light and yields life. Others say this is just metaphor dressed in moonlight, a poetic way of explaining the rhythms of nature, night and time. Still others more playfully argue that this is mythology's greatest example of rest-based productivity. Endymion never swings a sword, never embarks on a hero's journey, never slays a monster, and yet he ends up with a divine partner, an international fan club, and an entire calendar based on his children. If that doesn't challenge your ideas of ambition, nothing will. You lie there, eyes closed, imagining what it must be like to exist in that state. Not asleep for a night or even for a week, but for centuries. While the world turns, wars begin and end, cities rise and crumble, scrolls are written, and lost philosophers argue about socks, and still Endymion sleeps. And during all of it, Selene descends. Maybe she whispers stories. Maybe she rearranges his hair. Maybe she holds his hand for just a moment before vanishing back into the sky. And the children. 50 daughters scattered across myth and moonlight. Some stories say they were nymphs. Others claim they lived among the stars. One version suggests they were simply light, which is perhaps the most poetic way to describe mythological kids ever written. You breathe in the cool, imaginary air of Mount Latmos and smile. Somehow, a story that seems like it should be static, man, sleep's goddess stares, becomes alive. Because even in stillness, even in silence, stories keep unfolding. People keep dreaming for him and about him. The moonlight dims now, folding gently over the soft hills of Mount Latmos, where Endymion still as ever sleeps beneath the stars. But tonight you lean in a little closer. You're not here just for myth or moon romance. You're here for the nap itself and the curious idea of sleeping forever. What even is eternal sleep, you wonder? Is it death wrapped in a prettier blanket? Or is it a cosmic loophole that says, don't worry, you're still technically alive? You're just off. The ancients weren't always clear. Some said Endymion was immortal but frozen in time. Others said he was merely asleep in a divine coma with excellent hair. A few hinted that he aged in his dreams like a Greek version of Sleeping Beauty, but well without the spinning wheel or castle. Here's your historical fact for this chapter. In ancient Greece, sleep and death were closely related. Literally. In mythology, Hypnos sleep and Thanatos death were twin brothers. One came gently with dreams, the other quietly without. The Greeks saw sleep not as something to fear, but as a temporary visit to the same place the dead go, with a return ticket. So when Zeus gave Endymion the gift of eternal sleep, scholars still argue, was it kindness or cruelty? Let's bring in your quirky myth detail of the evening. Some later writers claimed that Endymion chose this fate, that Zeus offered him immortality, and instead of glory or eternal youth, Endymion said essentially, thanks, but I'll nap. This might be the most relatable moment in all of mythology. Forget the Herculean labors. Forget sailing around on golden sheep or building Trojan horses. Here is a man who took one look at the celestial buffet of godly options and said, actually, I'd rather sleep. And he meant it. Forever. Cue academic debate. Was Endymion's choice a form of passive resistance against the demands of divinity? A romantic metaphor for timeless love, or just a really poetic way to say no thanks, I'm tired. Some philosophers admire his rebellion. Others see tragic irony, a man with eternal potential wasting away in unconsciousness. But here's a radical idea. What if Endymion was the smartest of them all? He didn't suffer like Prometheus. He didn't fight like Achilles. He didn't fly too close to the sun or try to outwit gods. He just slept. And somehow he found love, family, fame, and peace, all while not doing much at all. You imagine him now lying there beneath olive trees, breath steady, the world drifting by in ripples of moonlight. Maybe he dreams. Maybe not. Maybe that's the point. And slowly your own body sinks deeper into stillness. The story winds down. The chariot of Selene passes overhead. No words exchanged, just presence. And that's the end of today's story. I hope you enjoyed my journey through history, discovering how love always finds a way no matter what. Now, as you prepare to rest, remember to carry a little of that love and hope into your dreams. Let it warm your heart and remind you that tomorrow is a new chance for something beautiful. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss any new episodes. Your support means a lot and helps me bring more stories like this to life. Good night, sweet dreams, and I'll see you in the next episode. Good night. Hey guys, tonight we're going to slip softly into the warm sandy hush of an ancient Egyptian morning, not the golden tombs or hieroglyphic glamour, but a far more relatable reality. One where yes, you are a middle-class Egyptian woman just waking up in a sun-baked mud brick home with a thatched roof and a cat who may or may not have knocked over last night's barley gruel. You're not royalty, you're not cursed, you're just trying to live your life while avoiding marriage-based headaches running your household and maybe filing for divorce before breakfast. So before you relax, take a second to like and subscribe if you find value in what we share. And comment where and what time you're listening from, because somewhere out there, another sleepy brain is about to wander down the Nile with you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake before dawn. The sky is still navy blue and a papyrus reed mosquito net dangles awkwardly over your sleeping mat, which is slightly damp from condensation. The cat, your eternal enemy and also your only friend, pounces onto your legs and then immediately demands fish. Your room smells faintly of old grain sacks and cool clay. You stretch. Your shoulder cracks like a tiny curse from a vengeful deity of back pain. It's going to be a long day. You pad across the floor made of smooth mud and pull back the reed curtain that separates your living space from the outer room. A slight breeze filters in from the Nile. It smells of silt and fish, which is in ancient Egyptian terms, refreshing. You glance outside and see other women already at their chores, scraping pots, tossing grain to their geese, yelling at husbands. It's comforting in a yes, we all live in the same sitcom kind of way. You pick up a clay bowl and rinse your face with cold water from the storage jar. It's not glamorous. Your eyes sting. You feel more like a startled eel than a majestic daughter of Isis. But here's the kicker, you're free. At least more than people thousands of years later will be. Because as a woman in ancient Egypt, somewhere around 1200 BCE, you can own property. You can inherit, you can sue, you can buy and sell, and most importantly tonight, you can leave your husband. Yes, you. No ceremonial parade necessary, no scarlet letters or bishops banging on your door. If you've had enough of his snoring, his bad bread, or his unfortunate habit of misplacing livestock, you can literally hand over a divorce declaration on papyrus and call it a day. This isn't just theory, it happened regularly. Archaeologists have uncovered actual papyri that record women initiating and winning divorce proceedings. Some even demanded their dowries back and got them. If that's not peak empowerment, what is? Your neighbor down the alley, for instance, divorced her husband last year because he lied about how many jars of beer he could provide. The document is written in a sharp, practiced hand. You admire it every time you borrow her grindstone. Now back to your cat. He's glaring at you with the intensity of an underpaid scribe. Fine. You toss him a scrap of dried tilapia, and he retreats to judge you from atop the granary box. Time to start breakfast. You crush some emmer wheat using your saddlequern, the grindstone rocking back and forth like the gentle rhythm of your grandmother's complaints. You mix it with water and a bit of coriander, forming small loaves ready to be baked in the clay oven. A fly buzzes. You swat. You miss. You sigh. Out in the courtyard, you see your cousin returning from the well with 2 amphorae. She nods to you, grinning. You mouth any gossip? She raises an eyebrow and whispers, Nefru's leaving Tati. You nearly drop the dough. This is big. Nefru, the perfumer's daughter, married Tati the stonemason just 2 years ago. Word has it he kept forgetting her birthday. In a society that values calendars made of stars, that's an unforgivable offense. You nod back. Tell me everything later, you mouth. She nods again and disappears into her home. You stoke the fire and think, divorce in this world is not a moral failure, it's paperwork. And while it's still easier for a man, let's be real, patriarchy hasn't taken the day off. Women wield surprising power, especially compared to what's coming down the historical timeline. It's ironic, isn't it? Ancient Egypt, with all its scarabs and scorpions, had more gender-equitable legal procedures than Rome, where wives technically couldn't even own a toothbrush without their husband's approval. That's not a joke. Toothbrushes weren't invented yet, but if they had been, Rome would have found a way to make them masculine. Back in your kitchen, the bread smells ready. You pull it from the oven using a piece of damp cloth so you don't burn your fingers. You take a bite. It's dense, chewy, slightly sour. Perfection, or as close as it gets in 1200 BCE. And here's a fun detail. Bread in ancient Egypt was often full of sand. Not on purpose, just from all the grinding with sandstone tools. You joke that your molars are secretly tiny chisels. The sun has risen higher now. The courtyard is glowing with that sharp honey-colored light that makes shadows look theatrical and regrets look smaller. You wrap the bread in linen, grab a fig, and decide to walk to the river. It's quiet at this hour. A group of priests chant in the distance. You sit by the water thinking not of the gods or death, but of something more human, what it means to have a choice. And in this civilization of pyramids and precision, one of its softest, most powerful truths is this: you can always begin again. You're still sitting by the river when a gust of breeze skips over the surface of the Nile and rustles your linen shawl. It smells like wet reeds and morning fish markets, which is not great, but strangely nostalgic. A pelican, very large and very entitled, hops nearby, eyes your fig, and decides against stealing it. You nod in approval. Good choice, bird. Back home, your cat is almost certainly knocking over a water jug. You let it go. Today you've got errands and not the fun kind. Your neighbor needs help measuring grain owed for a debt repayment. That sounds boring, and it is, but here's the twist: you're literate. Sort of. Enough to read numbers, count by tens, and occasionally smirk at the less precise work of your male cousins. In a society where writing is a powerful tool, women, especially of your class, aren't completely shut out. In fact, in certain temple schools, girls were taught to read and write, particularly those attached to religious households or professions like musicians, priestesses, or healers. You're not any of those things, but you did convince your older brother to teach you how to copy lists from the grain registry. You still practice on shards of pottery called ostraca, writing phrases like 2 baskets barley or Teddy is a goat man. You're very mature. This morning you tie a cloth over your hair, grab a stylus, and walk over to your neighbor's home. Her name is Kemi. She's 80 barefoot and sharper than a bronze needle. When you enter, she's already halfway through yelling at a chicken. I told you it's due today, she barks, not at you, but at the debtor who is standing stiffly in the corner, holding a small sack of grain and a face full of excuses. Kemi turns to you and grins. My registrar has arrived. You bow dramatically. All debts shall be judged. Together, you and Kemi measure the owed amount, a half hecate of barley, and make the man dump it into her pot. You count carefully, tapping your stylus to the rim. The man mutters about unfair weights. You glare. He quiets. Later, when the man leaves, Kemi cackles and offers you dates in gratitude. You decline because she dips them in garlic brine, and you're still haunted by the last time. Walking home, you think about record keeping. It's not glamorous. But in a world without banking apps, literacy, however basic, is a kind of magic. You can track trade, prove ownership, and call out nonsense when someone says they definitely gave you those lentils back. It's a skill most Egyptian women didn't technically need to survive, but many acquired anyway, especially in urban settings. Writing was everywhere: walls, statues, contracts, recipes. The bureaucracy of Egypt was thick as honey and twice as sticky. If you could navigate it, you had power. And sometimes, like now, that power feels good. You reach your home and find your cat has indeed knocked over the jug. He looks smug. You look resigned. You clean it up. Then with a groan, you shift to laundry. Not the fun kind. The Nile is right there, sure, but laundry is a production, pounding linen against stone, rinsing, drying on reeds, hoping the crocodiles aren't too interested today. You wash your tunic in your cousin's wrap. As you scrub, you think about the time a young noble passed through the village and marveled that your hands were so strong. You laughed because of course they are. You lift pots, crush grain, haul water, and occasionally throw small pebbles at local boys who make goat noises when you pass. Speaking of which, one of them is currently doing that again. You hurl a fig stem at him. It hits him right in the eye. Victory. As the tunics dry, you help your aunt repair a worn fence post. She's a carpenter by necessity, which is to say she's the only one in the family who knows which end of a hammer to use. You hand her tools and chat about temple festivals. She mentions that next month's procession for Hathor will feature professional female singers and dancers, many of whom are paid. That's right, paid. Women in ancient Egypt could be professional performers, and temple musicians were often women of status. They weren't just decoration, they were participants in sacred rituals. Hathor, goddess of music and joy, was often served by women in these roles, which meant opportunities for income, social standing, and occasionally gifts from smitten priests. You consider this. Singing for a living sounds appealing, but your voice, famously compared to a braying hippo during your cousin's wedding, has limited career potential. Still, it's nice to dream. After the fence is fixed, your uncle wanders in asking for help preparing his travel bag. He's going to Memphis on a papyrus delivery run. You help him fold cloth-packed barley cakes and remind him not to flirt with strangers. He winks and ignores you. You make sure to pack extra socks. Not for him, for the donkey. She blisters easily. At midday, you retreat indoors. The sun is high and furious. You sip tamarind drink and fan yourself with a palm frond. The house is still. Even the cat is asleep, sprawled on a cool stone like he owns the world. You envy him and briefly consider reincarnation options. In the lull, your mind wanders. What would your life be like if you were born 2 dynasties earlier, or into a lower class? Or as a man, would you still be? Would you still hate garlic dates? These questions oddly feel modern, but they're old. Everyone wonders about the what-ifs. Everyone negotiates their place in the order of things. And sometimes the order shifts. The afternoon sun begins its lazy descent, and you know what that means. It's time to start prepping dinner, which in your case means gathering wild greens, checking on your sourdough starter still alive, still moody, and trying not to trip over your uncle's sandals again. Why are they everywhere? No one knows. Possibly a divine test. You start with greens, not the fun kind like lettuce or grape leaves, the budget kind. Wild arugula, fenugreek, a few suspicious reeds that may or may not be edible. You sniff them. You guess they're fine. You chew a bit. Definitely not fine. Back in the kitchen alcove, you check on your clay oven. The fire is mostly out, just glowing embers, so you toss in some dried dung to revive it. Yes, dung. Your cooking fuel. Chic, organic, sustainable. Slightly horrifying. But it works. Once it's hot enough, you flatten a few barley cakes and slap them onto the oven wall. You don't have yeast, but the dough is bubbly enough from yesterday's air exposure. You hum as you work badly but confidently. The bread sizzles. Now for the stew, you peel onions. Your cousin arrives with a single dried fish and a shrug. That's the protein tonight. You drop it in with a splash of date wine and crushed coriander. The smell is sharp, savory, oddly sweet. You're pleased, your cat is not. He sulks. While the stew bubbles, your neighbor passes by to ask if you're attending the birth ceremony next week. Her niece is giving birth her third, and they're planning to call in a masentet, a birthing priestess, who specializes in spells, oils, and yelling at nervous husbands. You say you'll go. You like the chance and the honey cakes. In ancient Egypt, childbirth was both terrifying and routine. Women gave birth squatting on bricks, sometimes assisted by midwives, sometimes just gritting their teeth and praying to Taweret, the hippo goddess of birth, who frankly looks like someone you shouldn't mess with, even on a good day. She's got the body of a hippo, the arms of a lion, and the energy of someone who would chase you with a ladle. But her presence is comforting, and many women kept amulets of her near their beds. You have one too, not because you're pregnant, but because it's cute and protective. And sometimes you'll like to whisper your frustrations into its ceramic ear. You stir the stew and think about how women in your village support each other through these life events. There's a whole system preparation ritual, practical knowledge passed down. Older women guide the younger ones, not just in birth, but in herbs, relationships, even how to tell if your neighbor watered down the beer again. That happens a lot. Dinner is nearly done when you hear laughter outside. Your younger cousin has returned from the granary with his friends, all giggles and gossip. You wave and one of them hands you a folded piece of papyrus. It's a poem about you. It rhymes eyes with flies, which is not flattering. You roll your eyes. He beams. Inside, your aunt is lighting the oil lamp. The soft flame flickers against the clay walls, casting long shadows. The room smells like coriander, burnt barley, and warm dust. You dish out the food and everyone gathers, sitting cross-legged, passing bowls. There's a rhythm to it, a familiarity that feels like the universe is briefly in order. Someone tells a story about a crocodile who stole a fisherman's boat and became the village god for 3 days. It's possibly true, possibly not. You laugh anyway. After the meal, your grandmother clears her throat and tells everyone she once wrestled a cobra to save her sister. You've heard this story before, but you still lean in. Her voice drops. Her eyes gleam. The cobra, she says, was at least 10 cubits long and had a personal grudge against her sandals. You pretend to be amazed. You are secretly. Night falls slowly in Egypt. The sky turns copper, then indigo. Stars blink into view like someone is sprinkling salt across velvet. You walk outside for a moment, breath-catching in the stillness. It's quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you aware of your own heartbeat and the small, precise sounds of the world. A reed brushing another, a frog landing in water, a distant cow making very unfortunate noises. You lie down on a mat by the door. The ground is cool, firm. Your cat curls beside you. Somewhere a lute plays a sleepy tune. You think about everything you've done today, nothing remarkable, yet everything essential. Feeding, helping, cooking, laughing, holding the village together quietly, like mortar between bricks. Ancient Egypt, with its tombs, its temples, its towering stone dreams, is mostly this quiet hands doing ordinary things with extraordinary care. And as your eyelids drift lower, you wonder when the scrolls are dust and the statues are worn smooth. Will anyone remember someone like you? Not a pharaoh, not a general, just you. Morning returns like a ripple on the Nile, soft, patient, and entirely too early. The rooster crows, but you're already up, mostly because the donkey started braying before dawn. Again, he's dramatic like that, probably thinks he's the village's main character. You stretch. Your joints crack in protest. The straw mat did its best, but your spine suspects you slept on a pile of amphora shards. You roll your neck. You sniff the air. It smells like dew, clay, and last night's stew making a second attempt at relevance. You step outside. The sky is still smudged with starlight, but the village stirs. Smoke curls from a few rooftops. Someone's already grinding grain. Someone else is yelling at a goat. You nod in solidarity. First task, laundry. Not the glamorous kind. This is Nile-side realism, water hauling, stone scrubbing, frog dodging. You gather your tunics, dusty, sweaty, and mysteriously berry-stained, and head for the riverbank. On the way, you pass the potter's yard. He's already muttering about someone chipping his latest jar. Probably your cousin. She has a gift for damage delivered poetically. At the river, your laundry crew is already assembled, 2 women and an elderly man who claims he's just watching for crocodiles. You're 80% sure he's here for the gossip. The water's cool. The sun is warm. Your hands find rhythm dip, scrub, ring slap, soap, sort of. You use natron, a salty, sandy mix from the earth. It cleans. It also leaves your hands feeling like old papyrus. But at least they're clean scrolls. The others trade gossip. Someone returned a loom smaller than before. Someone else swears they saw a jackal spirit. You nod politely, not because you believe it, just manners. You wring the final tunic and drape it across an acacia branch, hoping the wind behaves today. On the walk home, you pass the granary. The guards are snoozing against giant baskets of barley. You almost poke one. One eye opens, you walk faster. Back home, you tend your tiny garden leeks onions and a plant that's either celery or an ambitious weed. You water gently, whisper encouragements. You're not saying plants can hear, but your onions are definitely thriving on praise. You spot a beetle. Gently, you move it aside. It's a scarab, sacred. To squish one would be a bad omen. Also, gross. In Egyptian belief, the scarab mirrored the sun god Khepri, pushing the sun across the sky like well dung. Beautiful, gross, a perfect metaphor. Inside, your aunt is spinning flax thread, humming a melody older than the pyramids. You join her, carding fibers, spindling gently. The sound is soft, repetitive, almost meditative. Your cousin bursts in holding a chicken. It laid an egg shaped like a fish, she declares. You look. It's egg-shaped. You nod. A sign of what exactly you don't say. By midday, the scribe arrives, short, smug-bearded. Someone stole honey from the temple. Suspicion swirls. The baker denies everything. You offer flat bread and try to look innocent. This segues into a cheerful chat about taxes. You're due to give a portion of your grain to the temple next month. Not because you want to, because tax collectors carry tally sticks. In judgment, ancient taxes weren't just coins. They were grain labor baskets, gossip. Got a new goat. Guess what, you're rich now, pay up. You've practiced your extremely poor face in the mirror. Just in case. After lunch, lentils and flatbread, you help your neighbor patch her roof. Palm fronds, mud, reeds. The storm last night wasn't gentle, but your teamwork is. She dreams of sending her son to apprentice with a temple scribe. You nod. A good life if he can avoid becoming smug. As the day wanes, you sit back. The patched roof won't win awards, but it won't leak. Much. Back home, your uncle returns from the market with figs. In gossip, a noblewoman's cat, he whispers, has its own servant. You blink. You look at your cat. He looks at you like he knows. You refuse to be outranked by a feline. Evening falls. You light the oil lamp. The room glows soft and amber. The village exhales. Quiet returns. You sit near the window, arms around your knees, breath slow. Today was long. Unremarkable. Essential. Laundry, lentils, laughter. Thread roofs, river-washed gossip. The work of women holding the world together quietly, completely. Egypt may be remembered for its monuments, but its soul, it lives here. In you. In the rhythm of your hands. In the stories whispered through laundry steam and flickering lamps. And as stars bloom over the dunes, you wonder, not if history will remember you, but if it already does. The sun climbs higher, straddling that fine line between pleasantly warm and your sandals are now on fire. You squint against the glare, linen balanced on your head, trailing your aunt toward the temple district. Today's mission, a weaving delivery. Supplying linen to the priests is in theory a great honor. In practice, it's hot fabric and a sore neck. The street hums. Merchants cry out about dried fish and polished beads. A boy chases a goose with a stick, both equally committed to chaos. A man yells about his pomegranates like they've written love poems. You sidestep a puddle and a cat. The puddle is less offended. You pass under a small archway where hieroglyphs politely remind people to behave. Behave in temple terms, meaning don't yell at the priests and don't steal the bread meant for the gods. You smile at a scribe with a smudged reed pen behind his ear. He winks. You ignore him. That's how they get you. Inside the weaving chamber, women spin and comb and weave like divine interns on a deadline. The air smells of flax and palm oil. Your aunt hands over the linen like it's a sacred scroll. You discreetly stretch your neck. The burden of prophecy is heavy. While she chats with the overseer, you wander to the murals, women dancing, playing harps, hair coiled like sculpture. You imagine that life harp music by a lotus pond. Less linen, more shade. But here's the truth, most women in ancient Egypt worked. Spinners, brewers, traders, field hands. Some were doctors, a few scribes or priestesses. Not all lived in palaces, just in houses like yours, with cats and clay stoves, and a cousin who thinks every chicken is magic. And speaking of surprising freedoms, today's history highlight women in ancient Egypt could divorce their husbands. No drama, no duel. Just a papyrus declaration, a witness or two, and a property split. If he burned the bread one too many times or forgot your birthday festival, you're out. And it wasn't rare. Records show women not only left marriages, but claimed their dowries back and won. Because in Egypt, marriage was a contract, and if a contract failed, you had options. Sure, society might frown, gossip might swirl like sand in a storm, but the law was clear: you had the right to leave. 2,000 years before most of the world caught on. Your aunt finishes her conversation, and you both begin the walk home. She tells you about her cousin married a potter, divorced him, then married a merchant who smelled more like cinnamon than clay. A glow-up, in her opinion. Back home, the courtyard buzzes. Kids make clay animals and smash them for dramatic effect. Your uncle tries to tune an old lyre. A chicken joins in. You briefly consider charging for tickets. You slip into the cool of the house to grind grain. The steady rhythm of the quern stone helps your thoughts wander. Forward press, rotate. You wonder, did the women who divorced ever feel lonely or free? A scholarly question forms in your head, soft as linen. Did these rights empower real women or just elite ones? Some say only the wealthy exercise them. Others say even village women like you use them too. The truth, as always, is probably buried somewhere in the mud brick middle. Your grandmother enters with dried lotus petals to make the house smell like a temple, she insists. You nod respectfully, but it smells like attic nostalgia. Evening arrives trailing honey gold light. Dinner is lentils, flatbread, and a fig if your uncle hasn't hidden them again. After you oil the door hinges to keep spirits or mosquitoes out, you sweep the yard, pat the cat, nod at the stars. Later you sit beside your cousin by the dying fire. She's quiet tonight. Finally she says, if I marry, I want to marry someone I can laugh with. And if I can't laugh anymore, I want to be able to leave. You blink, then say, that sounds like a scroll worth writing. She smiles, and night drapes gently over you both like linen soft and true. You wake before the sun again. Your cousin's shadow flits past the doorway like a quiet ghost with bedhead. The coals from last night's fire are still warm, so you coax them gently to life. A clay pot of water goes on top. Your first task, brewing beer. Before you get too excited, this isn't your fruity modern pint. It's more like a yeasty barley smoothie with hints of riverbank and yesterday, but it's filling, nutritious, and if the temperature's right, surprisingly tolerable. You start by crumbling half-baked bread into warm water, mashing it with your fingers. You add a scoop of old mash from the last batch, either for flavor or fungus, possibly both. It squishes between your hands like soggy clay. It's not glamorous, but in ancient Egypt, beer is life. It fuels workers. It honors rituals. It's the closest thing to breakfast and paycheck in one jug. Outside the door, morning begins to yawn. A donkey brays. Loudly. You nod toward it in mutual understanding. It sounds like how you feel before food. Your mother appears with bundles of flax. She'll spend the morning soaking, beating, and combing the fibers into thread. Not metaphorically. She wields a wooden club with suspicious joy. Today your task is market trade. You carry a small stash of onions and a jar of honey-hot commodities and tuck a frog-shaped amulet into your sash for luck and humor. Frogs are hilarious. The market is alive. Gossip and flies buzz in equal measure. A woman sells dried flower garlands. A boy waves dried crocodile skin. A man cries out, figs! So fresh they still remember the tree. At the spice stall, you trade honey for cumin and coriander. The seller eyes you warily. You compliment his goat. He beams. Over near the textiles, a woman wields a sandal mid-argument about dowries. You quietly step away. You find the fish seller, your cousin's request. Smoked mullet wrapped in reeds. It smells like a lake on fire, but it makes her eyes light up. You swap onions for it and head home feeling triumphant. Back at the house, the beer has cooled. You strain it through a woven sieve. It's chunky. You sip. It's fine. Like oatmeal that gave up halfway. Still it nourishes. Midday slams into the village like a sun-soaked anvil. You lie flat on cool tiles, considering becoming one with the earth. And that's when you reflect on today's strange historical truth. In ancient Egypt, people drank beer more than water. Not because they were party animals, because it was safer. The Nile, while sacred, was not Evian. Even children drank beer. It was hydration, nutrition, salary. Yes, some workers were literally paid in beer. 3 jugs per day was not a party, it was your payslip. Somewhere in history, an accountant quietly cried into a ledger. You fan yourself with a palm frond and wonder, did this beer-based diet help or hurt? Some archaeologists say the high-grain intake caused tooth decay and gut issues. Others argue it created a surprisingly balanced diet, especially paired with onions and fish. You roll over. A lizard scurries past. You salute it. Survivors recognize each other. Later, your grandmother gathers the family for a round of Senate, her favorite board game. No one remembers the rules, but the gods approve, she claims. You draw lines in the dirt and play. Half luck, half strategy, half trying to steal your pieces back when she's not looking. Laughter floats over courtyard walls like incense. And for a moment, the world feels simple, whole, sunlit. You lean back and watch the palm fronds shift gently against a blue sky. You think beer onions games. Maybe history isn't boring. Maybe it's just chunky. Evening simmers in slowly. The fish is grilled. The bread is flat but dependable. You chew, sip, smile. Frogs begin their chorus. A neighbor's baby wails in the distance. The stars blink awake. You lie on your woven mat cat, curled beside you, belly full, bones heavy. You whisper a thank you to the ceiling. And as dreams begin to stir, you smile softly, brewed and ready for sleep. You wake to the whisper of linen against your cheek and the soft crackle of morning air stretching through your bones. Another day, another list of things to carry, count, grind, and forget halfway through doing. The sky is painted that dull golden hue again, the one that says you've got 3 minutes before the sun starts yelling. You sit up and stretch, bones popping like tiny percussion instruments. Your younger brother is still tangled in a mat, 1 foot sticking out, toes twitching. The rooster crows from a rooftop like it's auditioning for a band. You sigh and get moving. Today is bread day, not the kind with sourdough starters or ironic mustaches. We're talking flour, water, and patience, a lot of patience. First, you collect the grains, barley and emmer wheat hauled in sacks that are definitely heavier than they were yesterday. You think they multiply when no one's looking, like ants or taxes. Then the grinding begins. The quernstone is your new frenemy. You kneel in front of it, dumping a modest scoop of grain into its basin. Then with rhythmic, aching motions, you grind the upper stone back and forth. It's like trying to flatten a mountain with your forearms. Dust floats into your nostrils and your arms begin to hum with fatigue by the second minute. This will take hours. Still, you push through. The flour once done is coarse and speckled. Egyptians didn't sieve it much. You ate what came out, stone grit and all. It probably explains why mummies often have teeth worn flatter than a coin. On the bright side, there's no floss in ancient Egypt to forget using. You mix the flour with water and salt, form it into dense discs, and press them into pre-warmed molds. Your hands are white with dust and dough. Your nose itches and your back has started filing silent complaints. You slap the loaves onto hot clay surfaces and feed them into the open fire oven. Smoke curls like a cobra, and you cough, eyes watering. This is the kind of task you can't skip, even if your village is under mild crocodile siege. The smell, though, it's magical, even if half the flour ends up in your sandals and behind your ears. As the bread bakes, you reflect on today's historical fact. Most households in ancient Egypt baked their own bread daily. Industrial bakeries did exist, especially for temples and large estates, but the average home churned out loaves like a ritual of survival. Now for the odd little detail, some loaves of bread discovered in tombs are rock hard and still intact after thousands of years. They were offered to the gods or left for the dead because apparently eternity requires snacks. You chew on a warm loaf. It's dry, hearty, satisfying. You chase it with water that's only slightly suspicious in color. Your mother asks you to deliver some bread to your aunt's household across the canal. You oblige, grabbing a basket and a walking stick for good measure. The walk is peaceful mostly. The path is dusty and dotted with beetles that move like they own the place. A few goats bleat at you, and one tries to nibble your sash. Rude. When you reach the canal, a narrow boat is waiting. It's a flat-bottomed wooden thing, more like a bathtub with dreams. You hop and paddle lazily and let the current nudge you forward. Papyrus plants brush your fingers as you pass. A heron takes flight and you smile. A frog leaps into the water and you jump less gracefully. At your aunt's place, she thanks you with a fig and offers unsolicited commentary about your posture. You bow anyway, like the overly polite loaf delivery person you've become. As you paddle back, the afternoon sky is thick with warmth. You pause to nap in the boat arms behind your head, drifting beneath dragonflies. Life moves slowly here, and for once you match its pace. You wonder aloud, did the daily grind of bread making unify communities or isolate them in routine? Some scholars suggest communal ovens were social hubs, places for gossip, matchmaking, or trade. Others argue the laborious process kept families isolated and domestic life strictly gendered. You decide it probably depends on who had the best bread. You return home with a sunburn forming on your neck and a new appreciation for anyone with flour in their eyelashes. Later that evening, the family gathers. The bread is served with lentils and a faintly fishy stew. You eat by firelight, cross-legged, listening to your cousin retell the tale of a jackal that stole someone's wedding cloak. You're not sure it's true, but it's oddly believable. After dinner, your brother challenges you to a palm frond sword duel. You oblige. He wins dramatically because you let him. Definitely because you let him. As night falls, the baked loaves are stacked in a clay jar ready for tomorrow. You lie back on your mat, the scent of baked grains still clinging to your hands, and close your eyes. The air smells different tonight. It's the kind of change you only notice after living through 1,000 nearly identical evenings. There's a whiff of wet stone, as if the Nile itself inhaled too deeply and sneezed into the wind. You stir from your mat before the stars fade, your muscles wrapped in the pleasant soreness of bread, labor, and boyish swordplay. You scratch your head, stretch, and realize what today is. Market day, the only day when things feel slightly less beige. You slip into your worn tunic, tie your belt twice, because the last time it came undone, you lost a bag of dates and your dignity, and gather what little your family has to sell a few hand-woven reed mats, some leftover pickled fish, and your personal favorite, a small clay figurine shaped like a duck but painted like a cow. Your sister made it. She insists it's a divine hybrid. You pack the items into a basket, hoist it over your shoulder, and head out just as the horizon begins to smear itself in pink. You pass neighbors doing the same, some whistling, some muttering, all trudging. It's a parade of hope and dusty toes. The market sits on the edge of a wide square just past the temple steps. Already early vendors are shouting prices that vary based entirely on who's asking. Someone yells fresh onions while another offers almost fresh onions. A goat bleats near a jar of honey, looking guilty. You set up your stall between a scribe's booth and a man selling sandals that look more like regrets than footwear. Your first customer is a woman with one eyebrow and a scowl that could peel papyrus. She inspects your fish, sniffs, and walks away, muttering something about last week's brine. You don't argue. You're not sure she was talking to you or to the fish. Soon, though, the crowd thickens. Children dart between stalls, chasing beetles or sticky date sweets. Musicians bang on tambourines. You sell a mat, 2 jars of pickles, and even the divine duck-cow hybrid. A man buys it for his daughter. You tell him it's lucky. You don't know if it is, but you want it to be. Around midday, the sun begins its slow descent into roast your ears territory. You retreat to the shade of a linen awning, eat a fig, and sip cold beer. It's not let's party beer. This is basically liquid bread beer. Thick, slightly sour, weirdly comforting. Today's historical fact, beer was a staple in ancient Egyptian diets. It wasn't just a drink, it was food. Everyone drank it, including children, because water quality was often questionable. It was nutritious, mildly alcoholic, and came in a range of strengths and flavors. Some workers were paid in beer. Records show pyramid laborers received daily rations of up to 4 liters per person. That's right. Beer wasn't just a treat, it was wages. Talk about a foamy economy. You trade one of your mats for a wooden comb and a polished shard of mirror. You stare into it. You look dusty and mildly heroic. You spot your friend, let's call him Mena, trying to impress a priest's daughter by juggling clay pots. He drops one. It shatters. He laughs too loudly. She walks away. You both exchange the kind of glance that says, we will never speak of this again. The debate of the day lingers in the air like the scent of cumin. Did beer culture democratize nutrition in Egypt or reinforce labor hierarchies by controlling workers through dependency? Scholars argue both sides. You decide it's probably both and neither. You sip and ponder, then just decide to enjoy the fizz. As the market winds down, you pack up what's left. 2 mats, a half-empty fish jar, a feeling that maybe today wasn't too bad. A merchant you like gives you a discount on sesame cakes. Another lets you smell her spices for free. That counts as friendship here. The sun slumps behind the palm trees. The canal glows gold. You walk home, shoes filled with dust and a mind filled with little victories. Your sister meets you at the door and immediately asks where the duck cow went. You tell her it's found a higher purpose. She glares. You hand her the sesame cakes. Forgiveness, it turns out, is made of sugar and seeds. That night, the family gathers again. Your mother smiles when she sees the polished comb. She uses it to fix your father's hair, what's left of it. Laughter fills the room, soft and warm. Someone starts humming a tune. You fall asleep to the sound of your sister retelling the duck cow's fate as a great epic. There are battles. There is romance. There is a heroic cow moo. Tomorrow will be slower again. The fields, the chores, the river. But today had music market and the sweet taste of sesame. You wake to the sound of sweeping, not bird song, not temple chants, not your mother yelling that the goats have escaped again. Sweeping. A dry, steady shh against the courtyard floor, as rhythmic as the river's current, but distinctly less wet. You sit up the mat clinging to your arm and peek through the curtain. Your father's already up, broom in hand, carving semicircles into the dust like he's painting with absence. You yawn, stretch, step outside. The sun is barely up, but already the courtyard smells of baking bricks and morning breath. Your little brother has tied a reed around the cat's tail and is calling it a sacred rope of Ra. The cat disagrees violently. Today is a maintenance day. No field, no market, no temple offering, just chores. Endless, meandering, deeply unglamorous chores. You sigh, adjust your belt, and begin. Your first task, lime wash the family wall. The limestone plaster flakes like pastry, and your job is to smear a thick white paste over the surface, using what is generously called a brush, but looks more like the tail end of a very confused palm frond. As you slap the paste against the wall, you hum to yourself something simple, something rhythmic. It's not music so much as muscle memory with a melody. The kind of tune people have been making up since Neolithic boredom was first invented. Your sister passes by balancing a jug on her head like she's auditioning for the goddess Hathor. She doesn't spill a drop, which is both impressive and vaguely infuriating. You take a break under the fig tree. The sun creeps across the ground like a lazy cat. Bees buzz around your ankles. You fan yourself with a shard of broken basket and eat a date that tastes like sugar and dust. Popular historical facts: ancient Egyptian houses required constant maintenance. The dry mud brick walls crumbled in the heat, and without regular whitewashing, they attracted pests and mold. People regularly replastered their homes using a mix of clay, sand, lime, and patience. You help your mother patch the storage jars with resin. It smells like tree guts and sticky ambition. You wash the family's linens in a basin that leaks if you breathe on it wrong. You sweep. You sweep again. You find a dead scarab and offer it a solemn funeral behind the goat pen. At one point, your cousin drops by with a bowl of lentils and a scandalous tale about a neighbor's lost sandals. You both gasp dramatically. It's the most exciting thing that happens all afternoon. By midday, you're covered in lime resin soap bubbles and a faint layer of existential questioning. You crawl onto the flat roof with a jar of water and a crust of bread. Up here, the world feels bigger. You see rooftops stretching like cracked plates toward the horizon. Birds loop above. A vendor yells something about leaks. Someone else yells back about prices. Classic. Weird details. Roofs in ancient Egypt weren't just architectural afterthoughts, they were functional living spaces. People dried fruits, stored tools, napped, and even hosted parties up there. Some wealthier families decorated their roofs with furniture. Others just kept the goats up there. As you sip your water and squint into the distance, you wonder, why don't we live on roofs more often? Better breeze, fewer bugs, excellent spying potential. Then you remember the goats. Still, it makes you think. Academic debate opening sentences: were ancient Egyptian rooftops more vital to domestic life than modern scholars have given them credit for? Some argue they were merely extensions of storage. Others believe they were the social hubs of the household, equal parts kitchen lounge and observatory. You decide it was probably both, and also a goat hotel. Later, you help your father repair the door latch. It squeaks like a mouse arguing with a hinge. You hold the plank while he hammers and he grunts approval. That's practically a love poem in dad terms. Evening slides in with long shadows and the smell of roasted onions. Your family eats together on woven mats. The cattail, now reed-free, sits beside you, eyeing your lentils like it's auditioning for your sympathy. You give it one, it spits it out. Ungrateful deity. Night falls, and with it the neighborhood chorus of yawns, snores, and very specific frog noises. You lie on your mat, skin tight with sunbones, content in their place. Maintenance days are the glue of life, not glamorous, not loud, but somehow holding the structure together. You close your eyes, imagining your next life as a pampered goose or a fig tree that never needs whitewashing. Probably a goose. They get fed grapes, unless they're the goose from the temple. You shudder. Not that one. You dream of bread, not symbolic bread, not metaphorical, spiritual, metaphor-laden bread. Just warm, crusty, sesame-sprinkled, straight from the clay oven bread. You're mid-bite when your sister dumps a water jug over your head and calls it ritual cleansing. It is not ritual cleansing. It's revenge for yesterday's incident with the reed frog. Fair enough. You dry off with a cloth that used to be a tunic and now resembles the vague memory of one. Outside, the air already feels like it's been personally preheated by Ray himself. You squint skyward and wonder if the sun ever takes a day off. Maybe moonlight is just his lunch break. Today you're going into town. It's not a festival, not a pilgrimage, just errands, but still town. The sounds, the smells, the absolutely unnecessary variety of turnips. You ride in a cart pulled by your cousin's eternally disgruntled donkey. The cart has 3 decent wheels and one that wobbles like it's having an existential crisis. The road is dust and hoof prints winding between tamarisk trees and date palms, their shadows striped like faded linen. The first thing that greets you isn't the market's bustle, it's the smell. Fish, dates, fish-stuffed dates, burnt onions, incense, donkey sweat, perfume, and something you hope is only overripe melon. You pass scribes, elbows deep in scrolls muttering about taxes. You dodge a man selling medicinal beetle paste. A child offers you a pebble and claims it's magic. You trade him a fig. Bartering is weird sometimes. Popular historical truth. Ancient Egyptian towns had thriving marketplaces where people didn't just trade goods, they exchanged gossip favors, prayers, grievances, and the occasional goat. Markets were the arteries of community life, with zones for fishmongers, potters, and a centralized gossip vortex. You and your cousin stop at a grain stall. He inspects the wheat like he's applying for a high priest grain council. You meanwhile are captivated by a woman roasting lentil cakes on a flat stone. The cakes hiss and sputter like edible little volcanoes. You eat 3, 1 was paid for. 2 were absorbed by the gods. Next stop, the potter. He's shaped like one of his amphorae, and has exactly as many teeth. He tries to sell you a jug with a lopsided bird painted on it. You politely decline. He insists it brings luck. You stare silently in a way that says, I know your nephew made this. He winks. You both move on, older, wiser, unchanged in fortune. The odd detail. Some ancient Egyptian pots bear smiley faces. A few cups feature crude, cartoonish grins, maybe child-made apprentice training or optimistic doodling. It's the ancient version of drawing a smiley on your lunchbox, or graffiti. Either way, it's endearing. You buy thread vinegar, dried figs, and a lotus-shaped hairpin. The hairpin's intended for your mother. Probably, unless you keep it and call it an heirloom of symbolic affection. You pause at the scribe's corner. Their services letters, written curses, lifted taxes, explain vaguely. One offers to write your name in elegant script for 2 onions. You have only one. He agrees anyway. Onion-based commerce is highly negotiable. Academic debate opener. Were scribes bureaucratic technicians or hidden power brokers? Some argue they quietly controlled legal and economic channels. Others say they were just ink-stained clerks with good memory. The truth may lie somewhere between their styluses and their smug faces. You return to the cart arms, full heart fuller. The donkey stares like it's rethinking life. You whisper an apology and give it a carrot stub. Forgiveness is a slow process. On the ride back, you pass a barley field and wave at the farmer. He waves back with the motion of someone who's waved too many times and slept too little. Relatable. You arrive home. Unload, wash your feet. Your mother eyes the lotus pin and raises one eyebrow. You hand it over with a dramatic bow. She snorts and wears it anyway. The sun slips behind the palms like a sleepy cat curling up. You climb onto the roof with a crust of bread and a jar of water. The market still lingers in your nose, your shoes, your stomach. And somewhere deep in your pouch is the smiley-faced pebble from that kid. You're not saying it's magical, but your cousin did trip 3 times on flat ground after you picked it up. Just saying.